Can somebody check the YouTube site to see if they see it going live yet?
I'm checking.
Yeah, no, not yet. I've got my eyes on it.
Okay, very good.
No, not yet.
Maybe if you click.
Oh,
go
no, you
live.
give it 30 seconds. Just give
Yeah.
it 30 seconds.
Yeah.
It
Okay,
says excellent connection.
Yep, just went live.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I see Cal's drawing.
Okay. And I'm going to share my screen now.
I'm
Yeah,
checking.
no, not yet. I've got my eyes on it.
Okay, very good.
No, not yet.
Maybe
Oh,
if you
we got to turn it all off now. The sound. It
Okay,
says excellent connection.
Yep, just went live.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Whose sound is that? Is that my sound?
Cal's drawing.
Okay.
Oh, it might be mine. I don't have my microphone muted. Hold on. Trying to do something else.
Oh, no, just mute not your microphone, but mute
Yeah.
the YouTube site.
Oh, I wasn't on. Then that's not me. I wasn't on the YouTube site.
Okay, whoever's had it on is off. All right, we have 123 participants. I was going to share my screen. And Paul, what do you see on the YouTube site when I share my screen? Paul, you're muted.
Neil, if you can hear me, what for your when I introduce you, could you what year did Shareable launch?
2009.
Okay. All right, it's top of the hour. I see we've got, why don't we give it another, watching the participants. For your, when I introduce you, could you, what year did Shareable launch? Somebody's got the YouTube audio going in the background.
Yeah, that's the problem. It's causing a problem.
Yeah, well, you could just mute the YouTube.
All right, it's top of the hour. I see we've got, why don't we give it another. Watch,
Paul,
who's
what do
running
you
YouTube?
see? Just mute the YouTube, the screen, under it, the volume.
She's like Groundhog Day.
YouTube audio going in the background.
Yeah, that's the problem. It's causing a problem.
Yeah, well, you could just mute the YouTube.
All right, it's top of the hour. I see we've got. Yeah, we got to solve that problem.
Paul,
Who's
what do you see? Just mute the YouTube.
Is that better?
All right, it looks like the mirror echoing voices is done.
Yeah. All right, Joe, can you hear me? I think we're ready to go.
Okay, I am ready to go. I can hear you, Maury. I think we are set to go.
All right, well, I'm going to presume that we're live and that everyone can hear me. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning. This event is taking place on a truly global basis. We have participants in every time zone around the world. We welcome you today to this virtual mini conference on COVID-19 and sustainability transitions, and hope you will enjoy what we have on offer for today. This session is scheduled to run for approximately 3 hours. Joe, could you flip to the next slide, please? Just as a brief introduction, I'd like to highlight the fact that this session today is sponsored by the Future Earth Knowledge Action Network, devoted specifically to systems of sustainable consumption and production. And if you are interested in being more actively involved in the activities of this network, information about how to do that will be provided at various points throughout the session today. Next slide, please. I'd also like to begin by expressing a hearty and enthusiastic thank you to our various partners and sponsors who have made this event possible. I'd like to give a big shout out to the Regional Center for Future Earth and Asia, which is headquartered at the Research Institute for Humanity and Nature, which itself is located in Kyoto. I'd also like to express my thanks to the Converge Network, based at the University of Colorado, which has provided the funding to make this session today possible. And I'd also like to give a final shout out to Taylor and Francis, the publishing company that owns and operates the journal Sustainability, Science, Practice, and Policy. Without the engagement of this whole range of partners, this session today would not have been possible. Next slide, please, Joe. I'd like to begin as a means of framing the discussion today by reading out this quote. COVID-19 has demonstrated that the foundations of prosperity are precarious. Disasters long talked about and long ignored can come upon you with no warning, turning life inside out and shaking all that seemed stable. The harm from climate change will be slower than the pandemic, but more massive and longer lasting. If there is a moment for leaders to show bravery in heading off that disaster, this is it. They will never have a more attentive audience. This comment jumped out at me because, as Joe has indicated here, it doesn't come from a sustainability manifesto. It's not a document that's been produced by the New Economics Foundation. It actually is a quote that comes from an editorial in this current week's issue of The Economist, which I think goes a long way in highlighting the fact that that issues that were at one time rather peripheral social and political considerations now sit very much at the mainstream of contemporary political discourse. Next slide, Joe. Wanted to give a little bit of background also as to how we've gotten to where we are here today organizationally. Back in the beginning of March, there was a small group of us who got together to write what ultimately was a blog post that we published on the Future Earth website. And for those of you who have experience with this sort of thing, this is the kind of essay or manifesto that one writes, and it gets read by a few dozen people, and then it disappears from sight. What was interesting about this piece is that within a week or so, it had attracted several thousand readers, and it gave us the inkling that we had tapped into an issue at a particular time that was very highly animated in people's minds. And so from that, we took upon ourselves the initiative, next slide, Joe, let me take a step back. And so this essay made a series of points that that from the perspective of today seem almost trivial, which gives some indication of how fast things have been moving over the last 8 or 10 weeks. In this essay, we talked about the necessity to scale back working hours. We talked about the need for a universal basic income. We talked about the fact that we were coming into a period of significant increase in video conferencing, that there would be a deep contraction, what sometimes has been referred to as a destruction of demand, especially in retail purchases. And then we also provocatively advanced the case that we were witnessing or due to witness the end of GDP as a formidable metric of well-being. And here we are now at the end of May, and in many countries, all of these initiatives have come to pass. So it's a bit humbling in that perhaps we were not sufficiently ambitious, but I think it's also an indication of how rapidly the wheel of change is currently spinning. Next slide, please, Joe. We then sort of took it upon ourselves to organize a what we called an open forum at the end of March that attracted quite a bit of interest and enthusiasm. Some of you on the session today may have participated in that. And out of that event held at the end of March, we then went back and looked at the transcript. And from that, we identified, Joe, next slide. We then identified a series of thematic groups that you see on the screen here now. A group devoted to designing government action, a group on global governance, et cetera, all the way down to group 10 on transdisciplinarity. And then subsequently, we added 2 more groups, one focused on digital automation in the workplace, and another on circular economy and supply chains. The session today is going to feature some of the ongoing work that has been catalyzed by several of these working groups. Next slide, please, Joe. Also, over the past 2 months, we've had a tremendous amount of interest and activity that's been taking place in a dedicated Slack space. So for a number of you on the session today have been participating in this. This space has attracted the interest of several hundred people. There's probably two dozen different Slack channels. And it's from this platform that the collaborations that are going to be showcased today have been catalyzed and facilitated. So if this is something you have an interest in participating in going forward, do let us know and we can enable that to happen. Next slide. So let me just profile briefly the agenda for the next few hours. We're going to begin the mini conference with a presentation by Neil Gorenflow, and I'll introduce Neil more formally in a second. The second session will be devoted to the activities of what we call working group number 1 on opportunities for local governments. We'll then have a presentation by the group focused on sustainable lifestyle changes in the post-COVID era. And then before we take a short break, we'll have a presentation focused on what we have been calling the care economy. This was an issue that came up in quite prominence in our earlier webinar at the end of March. Following a brief break to refresh either your coffee cup or your cocktail glass, depending on the hour of the day of where you're currently situated, we'll reconvene for a presentation on the Global South, another presentation on the circular economy, and then the final formal presentation will be devoted to an initiative on education for sustainable development that's been gathering momentum in Germany over the past several weeks. We'll conclude with a final plenary. The plenary will feature at the start a video that some of our colleagues have been putting together over the last few days. And then we will we'll move to some open discussion for those who will still be remaining with us during the latter hours, and then wrap things up about 3.5 hours from now. So next slide, please, Joe. Just a couple of quick briefing notes before we begin. Please keep your microphone on mute and your video turned off until you've been called upon by one of the moderators to speak. Be attentive. We have 2 different tools working simultaneously, a chat box and a question and answer tool. If you're not familiar with these facilities. The chat box is meant for real-time exchanges among participants. The Q&A tool is for questions that you would like to pose to the presenting panelists or to the moderator. Do be aware that we will clear all the questions at the end of each presentation and start each new presentation afresh. The Q&A tool also allows for upvoting of questions by all participants. So you should be able to activate the tool on your own screen and then click the thumbs up button icon, which will record your vote of support for that question. And as a particular question gathers support, it will move up the list. If you experience any technical problems during the mini conference, please send an inquiry to Esty at the email address indicated there. And a couple of other points. Presenting teams have been reminded of the importance of keeping to their allocated time, and we will do everything we can to try to stay on schedule. And we also encourage participants who are joining via the YouTube channel to also take advantage of the live chat tool that is available there. Next slide, please, Joe.
Maury, do you want to mention Cal?
Oh, yes, right. Okay, thank you for the reminder. So I'd like to introduce Cal Bracken, who is a professional illustrator. You should be able to see Cal's iPad in the gallery view if you're configured in that way. There's a nice illustration of Cal himself. Cal is going to be drawing the mini conference as we proceed. You'll be able to watch Cal on his gallery view screen as he works. And from time to time, we will bring Cal in and feature him on the big screen, as it were. So we'll be able to see the work as it progresses. So Cal, thank you very much for joining us today. And we very much look forward to seeing how you interpret the proceedings that are going to take place. All right, then with that all behind us, let me then introduce our plenary speaker for today. And I'm extremely grateful to Neil Gorenflo for accepting the invitation to present here. It's extremely early in the day where Neil is out in Silicon Valley of California. So thank you, Neil, for joining with us today. For those who don't know Neil, Neil is the co-founder and the publisher of Shareable. Established initially in 2009, Shareable is an award-winning website that has been at the heart of what we might think of as the communitarian part of the sharing economy. Since the emergence of the pandemic, Shareable has been very much at the heart of facilitating what we might think of as a mutual aid economy. Neil has a former background as a researcher and a stock analyst, and for the past 10 years and more has been devoting himself to launching and nurturing Shareable and the extremely important role that it is playing in focusing on a more mutualistic and communitarian-oriented system of mutual aid sharing and collaboration. So Neil, I pass the microphone over to you, and very much look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Great. Hey, thank you, Maury. I really appreciate it. And before I dive in, I just want to say what an honor it is to help welcome all of you to this conference. I'm so grateful for the work that you're doing for sustainability transitions. I value your work, and I also value you. I've had nothing but positive experiences in this community. It's one where decency, science, and truth count. And I don't take that for granted these days. You know, when Mari first told me about this conference, he said there might be a way for me to be involved. I didn't hear from him for a while after that exchange. Then last week he asked me to keynote, and yeah, I guess I'm involved now. But I was surprised when he asked me, and then I, you know, reflected a little bit about it, and it probably has to do with this. That at the beginning of the year, I made a pledge to do a life experiment called the Year of Living Locally, and to blog about it. And you know, and this would involve a whole range of sustainable behaviors that I would try. And then, you know, when COVID-19 hit, this became, you know, a public pandemic diary, actually, and you know, things got a whole lot more local than I expected. On top of this, the organization I lead, Shareable, switched our solutions news coverage to community-led responses to the pandemic, which we call the People's COVID-19 Response. And yeah, let's advance the slide too, please. Great, thanks. So in short, I've had this unique experience of chronicling what I was doing personally during the pandemic, but also while publishing about what other people were doing worldwide, you know, in particular, what they were doing to help one another, right? So, you know, that's what I'm going to share with you, plus some reflections about what this might mean for sustainability transitions. So yeah, next slide, please. Yeah, so yeah, at the round, I would say the end of last year, the beginning of this year, you know, while I had long been concerned about the drift of society, you know, in unequal, unsustainable, and authoritarian directions, I really felt internally like the tide was getting stronger. I felt like I was getting pulled into it. I felt a tangible loss of coherence and safety. I felt a lot more anxiety too. And, you know, I kind of found myself at a threshold and, you know, with an urgent need to make some changes in my life. And if I didn't, I felt like things would get much worse for me personally, and maybe unbearable. So I even though I run Shareable and we're all about sharing, and I've been a sustainability practitioner for at least, you know, 15 years, you know, I felt like I needed to take even another step, and, you know, another big step in a positive direction. And so I, you know, pledged to dramatically increase my engagement with my local community. And this is where I felt like I had the best chance to, you know, sort of shape my circumstances for the better, and where I could develop more social capital locally. I had a lot of social capital globally from my work with Shareable, but surprisingly, I hadn't really dug deep roots here where I live. And I thought that was kind of a problem. And I thought that also could boost my well-being and quality of life. So in my Year Living Locally life experiment, I would focus on 3 areas. Personal behavior change, like less screen time, more local purchasing, and that's number 1. Number 2, neighborhood scale projects. And number 3, more engagement with local government. And that also I would write regularly about my experience, you know, a blog post every other week at least. So next slide, please. So one of the first things I did to kick off my local year was to become a Cool Block leader. And so Cool Block is a program by the Empowerment Institute where you get your neighbors together, and over a series of meetings, you take on some sustainability tasks, things that you do in your household, things that you do together. It's like a 4 to 6 month period. And, you know, to get started, you have to knock on your neighbor's door. So that's on the slide there. You can see me and my son, Jake, he's 10. And that's what we did. We knocked on 57 doors. That's the size of our neighborhood. We have a neighborhood association. So I just took that as the scale to work on. And, we recruited 12 households to join our Cool Block project. And that was really a great experience. At first, I was really nervous about knocking on my neighbors' doors. I didn't really know many of my neighbors. I knew the ones like right next, my next door neighbors. That's just really eye-opening and also surprisingly very empowering is that, about halfway through, I felt like, oh my God, I really am really enjoying this, or, I felt just, come alive. And I imagine knocking on everyone's door in Mountain View. Like, okay, I can knock on more doors. I could be like a Paul Revere for sustainability or something. I had that vision that this was a moment that everyone should be knocking on each other's doors and inviting them into change. So that was a really great feeling. And, I had my households all set to join, and we were going to do I had them also come over to my house, and we had what was called the information meeting, and that leads to the commitment to people joining the program. And we're all set to do the first sort of action-oriented meeting. And that's when, COVID hits, right? So next slide, please. And so I wasn't really sure what to do, and neither was like the Cool Block mothership. They suggested that we just pause everything, and I wasn't really excited about that because I had put a lot of energy in getting things started. Their program is designed for in-person meetings, and obviously we had to go virtual. I didn't want to stop, and neither did my neighbors. So we took Cool Block virtual, and that's a slide of us on Zoom, and then next slide, please. And then one of the Cool Block members set up a Slack channel for our neighborhood. And so through Slack and Zoom, Zoom check-ins three times, every other week, then a bunch of activities started to emerge, right? So we had this kind of communication channel and rhythm. We had the Zoom every other week, and then we had Slack in real time. And so the 3 streams of activity, Cool Block, we kept that going, but that wasn't the only thing. Other things started to emerge too. So neighborhood scale projects outside of Cool Block got started, and then mutual aid with my neighbors, and then also helping people outside of the neighborhood. And so the Slack communications also was much broader than this. So there was, COVID info, there was entertainment stuff, there were personal projects, and there were exchanges of material. A lot of exchanges. You can see on the slide there that's on the left. One of my neighbors started some backyard gardening projects. Other neighbors were doing that too. So people were sort of starting their own personal projects. And then on the other shot of communication on Slack is, it was pretty typical also, with just people helping each other and exchanging stuff and so forth. Okay, next slide, please. So, while this is all happening too, I had to, it's like, how do I face this crisis personally? How do my family, how does Shareable? So in the beginning, it was, it was just a lot of confusion. I wasn't really sure what to do. I talked to some really good friends to help get my bearings. The question was, would I simply hunker down at home with my family or something else? Because a lot of the leadership communication was just simply that, stay at home and nothing else. And I thought that was not very helpful in some ways, not helping people think about what role they could play beyond just staying at home, which was a lot to do. But I thought there was room for other stuff too when I started to think about it. And as a family, we decided to treat the situation as our new life. This is it. Let's not just, spend this time waiting for things to quote unquote go back to normal. Let's just make the most of it like we would normally do, and not just wait it out. And we would try to create a routine and things to look forward to. And so what my wife and I did, that's my wife, Andrea, and the Vanna White pose there, we put a month-long calendar on the wall next to our kitchen table as a way of putting things down that we were looking forward to do, and thinking about this moment as something that we were all going through together, and it kind of just a symbol of our, really a symbol of our life and time together as a family, as people. So that was a kind of morale booster, I think, and help, kind of reset or reframe the experience for us. And on there we would put, we planned all kinds of activities, special dinners, game nights. So yeah, next slide. So special dinners, food became a big thing. There's those machines on the sidewalk there are actually robots. So my son wanted to order from this new service that delivers by robot, and it takes the food in this warmed container to a drop-off point near our neighborhood, and we open it up and they get the food. So that's something new. That's Silicon Valley for you. So next slide. And one of the things my wife did was set up game nights virtually with our friends through this service called Let's Roam. And you can kind of do a like quiz night, do charades, and it walks you through everything. It keeps track of the score. Sessions last like about an hour or so. And it's super fun. We had a lot of fun with that. We've done 3 or 4 of those. Next slide, please. And the picture of that book there is a kind of family adventure thing where you take little adventures together, stuff that you could kind of do at home. It's a pandemic themed, and then you chronicle your adventures and how they turned out. And then the other thing, Paint the Town, is my wife took painting lessons with her friends with a painting teacher, and all the materials are sent to your home, and then you open them up and join the Zoom and learn some about painting. So they had a lot of fun with that. We also had, a few happy hours with friends, especially in the beginning. And then, many Zooms with extended family. Our son got tutoring, including math and physical education. He did he spent a lot of time on Zoom playing Minecraft and Roblox with his friends. So he's 10, and that's been really a good way for him to connect. Next slide. And then, a big part of this experience for me has been mutual aid. So part of my decision of how to face the moment was to commit to mutual aid and really just say yes to every opportunity out there, and to really seek out opportunities to help out, to participate. This not only helped me meet my local year commitments, it really gave me a sense of agency, coherence, and control. And, I didn't want to just passively accept the experience as told or as it came. I wanted to shape it for myself. And, plus it was, as I got into it, it just felt uplifting to me and also those that I engage. And so this is how we got started. Next slide. We did a PPE drive amongst all our neighbors. My wife works at a hospital. She then took it to the drop-off location, which you can see the person accepting our donation. Next slide. We did 3 food collection drives, and then also a collection for bikes and toiletries in the neighborhood. And I helped. My role in it was to coordinate the collection and get stuff to my house, and then I would take it to another collection point. And so I was like the delivery guy, and so that was a lot of fun. It gave me something to do outside the house that was fairly safe. Next slide. And then there was a lot of mutual aid just in the neighborhood, just with the 24, I think it is, households that joined the Slack group. And there was a ton of exchanges of baked goods. So we got at least 6 items of baked goods, all Colombian cheese bread and sourdough loaves, chocolate banana bread. And that was super uplifting to get stuff on. You can see one of the loaves here in the slide. And then this is, one of my breakfast one morning, made, toast made of some, neighborhood bread with jam from a neighbor. So it was really interesting because, through this whole process, Cool Block Plus the pandemic, I became more connected, and my neighbors became more connected than ever. That was really great. Okay, next slide. And then health. Another decision I made was like, okay, this is an opportunity to focus on health. And I really felt like mutual aid was a piece of this. And also I, kind of became more diligent about my meditation and doing it every day. And as well as exercise. I regularly exercise, but, I just also became more diligent about the exercise. Also introduced a new thing to my routine, is doing stand-up paddle on my skateboard. So there's a special pole that you can use for that. You can see my skateboard, and I had this stuff in my house, and I was like, okay, let's use it. Let's try it out. And, it's really fun and good upper body workouts, a nice complement to biking and running. And then also nature, anytime I could get out into nature. And, we went for a picnic, the first time we've gone for a picnic by the bay. So we're about, a mile away down the Stevens Creek Trail from the San Francisco Bay. It's really beautiful. I go out there regularly, but this time I took my family for a picnic, and it was a gorgeous day, and the wildlife was just teeming like never before. It was amazing. The visibility was great. You could see all the way across the bay. That was awesome. And then also just projects like doing positive things around the house or for neighbors that often sustainability related or Cool Block related, but just, getting busy with my hands. Next slide. And so this is a sample of the stuff that I did. There's my son with some sunflowers in front of our community garden plot, Willowgate Community Garden in Mountain View. And that is the most organized garden that we've ever done. It's really in great shape. We put more time into it than ever. And it's also been more of a team effort. Usually I'm the main laborer, but everyone is pitched in, so that's cool. Below that, you can see my son's Vans, which I did a repair job on using some shoe goo and some old bicycle tire inner tubes. And I prepared our 3-day food cache. This was part of Cool Block emergency preparedness. And then I made a new compost bin for our backyard. So next slide. And then also we had to decide, I had to decide, and my team, my colleagues at Shareable is like, well, what is our response at Shareable? What are we going to do? And this personal decisions and personal experience helped inform, and resolve this dilemma at work. And, when COVID hit, our editorial plan was instantly obsoleted. So we had to really kind of pivot very quickly, and we came up with a new plan. And we began focusing our solutions journalism on this huge global wave of grassroots mutual aid that was happening. It was like nothing else I had ever seen all around the world. Tens of millions of people, probably something like that, helping neighbors. We called the series the People's COVID-19 Response. Next slide. And here's just a couple stories that are representative of our coverage. That first one, the response, resisting COVID-19 with mutual aid. That's actually part of our podcast called The Response. And we did an episode about mutual aid in Chico, California. One of our audio producers was living there. So we had this opportunity to do a 30-minute audio documentary about that. So that was great. We were able to really get that done just in a few weeks. And I suggest, recommend that you listen in and subscribe to the response. This is one of the better episodes. And then also just opinion pieces as well. Really encouraging people to frame this moment also as, be safe, yes, but help your neighbor. There's people a lot of need, and find who needs help among your friends, among your family, and among your neighbors. That was great. All right, so next slide. So a little bit on the scale and character of the mutual aid and what we were seeing out there. So I estimate tens of millions. It might be more. If there are billions of people, in some mode of shelter in place, then you could get to tens or even hundreds of millions of people just by 1 or 2%, actually being part of the mutual aid. And I think that's pretty reasonable to assume. That it tended to be very neighborhood in scale, and I think that was like kind of call to action that sort of emerged is take care of your neighbors. Do what you can in your neighborhood. Though there were some, district and city scale efforts as well. And then, it was a real, a part of this also was like to use appropriate technology, just simple tools to help people. And the use of Google spreadsheets and also Google Forms was a way to take in people's needs and then match them with what people had. And, some people did some neighborhoods, like some neighborhoods in Brooklyn, in New York had much more complicated tech, but using what was available and patching it together. And then also using the technology with an eye to building solidarity and social capital. So not just making things as efficient as possible, but using it as a way to bring people together and build connections safely. Next, no, not next slide, sorry. And then it's kind of a mix of I think, mostly new groups springing up, but also old groups, from Occupy, from Democratic Socialists of America, groups that had, been mobilized before, or in other crises and other situations, re-gearing to serve this moment. And let's see, the last bullet point. And I think the care was with political content, but mostly by example that, mutual aid is a at the heart of the anarchist idea and philosophy. And I think this was conveyed, subtly and mostly by example, but there's, some new politics entering into the mainstream, I think, through this as well, which I think is very interesting. And then next slide. All right, so some reflections. Meanwhile, while all this is going down, whether the family life, the neighborhood life, and my work at Shareable, I was noticing, change all around me. No more roar of cars, more wildlife, clearer skies, cleaner air. My street became a busy but safe promenade, which was, I really liked that. This sort of more conviviality, actually, and more people exercising also, an uptick in neighborhood gardening activity. And then, there's of course, a darker side, a downside here too, that there was a huge demand on our local food bank and other agencies giving direct aid. One that I worked with, it does food drives for 200 families living in vehicles, and they take collections every week. So this is not a one-time thing. There's this ongoing urgent need that some families in our community have. I also, in my extended social network and family, there were a few suicides, sadly, and this was crushing. And I learned that calls to crisis hotlines spiked by 800%. So there was this level of psychological distress that I hadn't experienced before or seen others really before as well. While we were okay, our little family, I mean, it was like all around us, especially in the beginning, this was really tough to bear. And in response, I think the mutual aid, that helped to act on that. I also gave more money than I ever had in this period to friends and also to causes. And so there was also this kind of, big global surge in empathy. And so all in all, it seemed like life compressed. The best and worst felt deeply and intensely all at once. And what of sustainability transitions? So this is my last slide. Next slide. And so just a few quick thoughts about what will stick. I think, even though there was social isolation, I think a lot of new social capital has been formed. And I think this is a foundation for social change. But what kind, that's an open question. Will there be progressive oriented protests, labor strikes, more populist expression? I'm not sure. I think that my experience in my neighborhood was a widely experienced. So I'm hoping, and we're thinking at Shareable, how can we leverage this new neighborhood social capital for more sharing, for sustainability transitions. And then I feel like a big focus all around was with food. More activity supporting food security. Consumption has been dampened, demand damaged, and this sort of people gravitating toward experiences versus things. So will this lead to a more permanent reduction in consumption, this post-materiality and this pullback? And then the last point, just digital life. I mean, this was really a mass experience and what's possible for work, sociality, and family life. So that's just kind of the tip of the iceberg about what will stick. And this conference is going to go much deeper, and I think this is great questions for researchers. So with that, I'll end and thank you and also take questions. And get our book too. Go to Shareable, sign up for our e-newsletter, and get a free copy of Sharing Cities, our book about sharing in cities. Thank you.
All right, great, Neil. Thank you very much. I'm going to turn the controls over to my colleague, Claudia Santos, and she's going to manage the Q&A portion of this session for the next few minutes. So Claudia, over to you.
Hi. So we can see that Ethan Goffman has a question, one of the most upvoted questions here in the Q&A. We're going to unmute you, Ethan, so that you can ask your question live. Are you there, Ethan?
I think he might have dropped off. Claudia, do you want to put the question to Neil?
Yes. So Neil, his question was, how might you go about translating an ad hoc local efforts to long-term political change?
That's a great question. And, I think about the sort of organizing pyramid, where at the foundation is social connectedness, in the middle is shared our common ground, and at the very top comes action. So I think we've got a start then on that bottom of the pyramid, that social capital formation, that social connectedness, and then it goes off from there. Already in my neighborhood, where there are a couple of projects aside from Cool Block happening that has been catalyzed by me knocking on doors and also the pandemic. So that's the pathway. But I think that it's really important to build those connections and find common ground first before, not to go too quick to to action, to political questions.
Okay, next up we had an anonymous question, which was, how do you ensure inclusivity across income and cultural divides in your community? And Maria Jose from Mexico commented on this. So I would like to ask Maria if she would like to speak at this point.
Hello. I'm Maria from Mexico City. I thought that question was interesting, and it makes me think about different societies. And I hear that, and maybe looking at my close neighbors, I feel that also that connection and that story makes sense. But when I look to other neighborhoods, I feel that very naive, and that how can you respond to upgrade this to other realities, or also other needs or wishes of other type of communities?
Great question, Maria. And I have the same feeling, is that me and my neighbors are it seems like solidly middle class all around, and yet there's other families, other communities nearby where that's just not the case, and the struggle is day to day, and I think there's no easy answer, but it definitely begins with a commitment, and a commitment to be inclusive, to think about other families. I felt fortunate, and that the people in my neighborhood were already thinking this way, and thinking how we could help others outside of our circle. And yet at the same time, my personal feeling is that while that was necessary and it was helping, it was far from enough. So that we would, the more satisfying, effective thing would to be build on this some. And I got to know some of the folks serving those communities through doing my relay and so forth, and I just got a window into how deep the need is. So the chasm between us in terms of our situations, became very, very real, very of the moment on my mind.
Sometimes
Claudia,
it
maybe
feels like
maybe we take one more question.
Yes, I would like to call Ashley Fitzgerald.
Sure. Hi, Neil. I'm wondering if you could talk about your thoughts in the midst of experiencing this crisis on the ability of people to be resilient and creative, not just in spite of the crisis, but motivated by it, seeing how quickly people can solve problems when they're sort of forced out of their normal reality.
Yeah, I think there is an amazing ability to this. And in my own experience, what was essential was connecting with friends to kind of get my bearings and think about how to handle and the stance to take in the moment, right? So I really leaned on some colleagues, and then once I got my bearings, once I was like, okay, this is what I'm going to do, this is how I'm going to handle it. Then I was incredibly energized, and just I had this surge of energy for about a month, and also a kind of high, I'll tell you, as well, and just looking forward, looking for ways to help out, and the more I did, the more I wanted to do this kind of thing, and so thinking about the public communications around the pandemic, I thought the leadership communication was extremely poor in some regards, and that it really really dropped off, especially in the area of how people should view the crisis, and like psychologically speaking, and also what they could do that's proactive and be part of the solution. There just wasn't enough of that. I can't remember hearing anything, in fact. And so a lot of people were left to just figure it out for themselves. And I thought that was a huge missed opportunity, except that people did figure it out for themselves and relatively quickly. And that was amazing. Yeah, I hope that gets a little bit at your answering your question.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay, Claudia, Neil, thank you very much. And for folks who are working in the back scenes, Paul, thank you very much for facilitating all of that. Neil, very much appreciate you joining us here today, and hopefully you'll stick around for some of the proceedings to follow.
Yeah, thank you, Maury. That was awesome.
Thanks, Neil.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Neil.
Yeah,
and you'll appreciate the likeness that Cal has drawn of you.
Oh, cool. Awesome.
I'm sure your son will appreciate it in particular.
I will show him. He'll be psyched.
All right. Well, then we're going to sort of reorganize a little bit over the next few seconds and invite up to the virtual podium, as it were, Thomas Reuter, Amy Burnett, Jenna Lamphere, and Liga Rutzi. And they are representatives of Working Group 1 from the initiative that's been carrying forward over the past 6 or 8 weeks. The title of their presentation is Opportunities for Local Governments to Advance Sustainability in a Post-COVID World. And if everything goes here as planned, I am going to pass the virtual baton over to Thomas, and he'll kick things off.
Okay, thank you very much, Maury. And I would like to begin by saying that what we have been working on in this group is really relevant to the entire network, because of course we all want to see government action. And when we were given the brief of working on this topic, we thought about how best to tackle it. And of course, we wanted to actually, stimulate government action. Next slide, please. We thought hard about how to do that, and because it's a crowded field in terms of policy advice, and we decided that the field is not as crowded when it comes to local government. And so we concentrate on local government. I know that's not something that everybody's working on, but many people, I think, throughout the network have worked locally, because in the end, all action is local. Then we decided that we would structure our text that we worked on in 3 parts. The first, we had the idea of writing an open letter, which in effect became an introductory text, presenting a model for change at a systemic level, because we firmly believe that a transformation to sustainability has to be systemic, because there are all these cross effects that have to be considered. We can't just try and fix one part. And Liga will be speaking next about that model. And the second part is a compendium of local initiatives that is self-generating. So we've created basically a list or compendium of commendable local government actions in the wake of COVID-19, but also before. And we want to use platforms of local governments, existing platforms, to advertise this compendium and ask local governments to add their experiences onto this self-generating platform. Finally, we have a section on case studies of systemic transformation, because we, as I said, want to highlight the fact that all transformations need to be systemic. We need more systemic thinking or holistic thinking. Therefore, we also want to feature some detailed case studies that show how particular local governments have dealt with a unique constellation of problems, opportunities, resources that they find in their jurisdiction. And so that's the basic structure. And I will come back again at the end, but now I would like to hand over to Liga, who will speak about the model.
Thank you, Thomas. Next slide, please. Thank you. Yes, so our group consists of both academics and also activists and people who are actively encouraging work of local governments and national governments towards sustainability transitions. So we thought that it was important to use pandemic and to see pandemic as a catalyst for action. So something that could allow governments, local governments, to look at the different experiments that have been done with radically different forward-thinking, responsive and systemic ways in thinking of how these communities could be transformed into more sustainable places, both for people, but also in terms of production and distribution of goods and services. So we thought that that we should come up with the deductions, look at that, and then also to link with each other, and also to see ways how they could actually shape their own action. There are already several initiatives that collect different and track different actions by local governments. So we have both EU focused and then also in North and South Americas, there are different action trackers there as well. We have also heard that C40 mayors, for example, or also the local governments for sustainability network, they also have launched their own sharing of ideas and collection of valuable resources. But what we recognized was that all of these were mostly tackling particular aspects of sustainability transitions, and we wanted to create and encourage to look at more systemic ways in different aspects that were needed for the sustainability transition. So in our open letter, we encourage local governments and local government officials to look at our local action compendium and to engage with that, to find inspiration and to also recognize the need of moving forward in a more comprehensive way. So next slide, and over to you, Amy, to explain a bit more about that.
Thank you very much, Liga. So to structure our compendium, we have decided to work with the 10 principles that have been set out under the One Planet Living framework, and they were developed by Bioregional and WWF, the environmental charity. We've also added 2 additional ones, because one is where you could have, it doesn't just sit into one box. So if you wanted to kind of submit something to the to our compendium, then that would be more of a kind of holistic perspective. But then the ones that have already been identified in One Planet Living, we have health and happiness, equity and local economy, culture and community, land and nature, sustainable water, local and sustainable food, travel and transport, materials and products, zero waste and zero carbon energy. And obviously some of the initiatives that Liga's just mentioned, they're really trying to stimulate accountability and monitoring as well, of what is the progress so far on trying to achieve or try and realize sustainability transition. So we thought what was missing from the One Planet Living framework was this idea around accountability monitoring, which we've added to this. And that's where we're listing some of the initiatives that Liga's just talked about as well. And you may wonder why we've chosen this and not the SDGs, for instance. We felt that this was a simpler way that it's easier to capture some initiatives in these particular groups. And I know that there has been a lot of collaboration with Bioregional, who developed the One Planet Living framework, and the organisers of the SDGs. So they're not, you know, people who are not speaking to each other already. And we've also done an initial mapping of the differences between One Planet Living and the SDGs, and they actually sit really nicely together. But one of the interesting things is that, for instance, this has got an emphasis on travel and transport, which is really important, for instance, for the city or the town or even parish scale, which may not necessarily be captured by the SDGs. Also, the emphasis on equity is important, whereas the SDGs are focusing economic growth. So if we're thinking around this idea around systemic transitions, we thought that this was a good model to start experimenting with. So this is how the compendium is structured, and we're obviously asking a little bit more detail around the initiatives that people will be submitting to that. And you can see the link if you wanted to submit your example to the compendium. And as Thomas has already mentioned, whether or not it's a pre-existing or something that's come out as a result of COVID-19 is really important to track those mechanisms and processes for transition. So thank you very much. Next slide, and over to Jenna.
Does Jenna have her microphone on?
Sorry,
Jenna?
I've just promoted Jenna to a panel to a panelist. Sorry about that.
Yes.
All right, there we go. Can you all hear me?
Yes, you're loud and clear.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So what I'm going to do over the next few minutes is provide a brief overview of the multi-level perspective on transitions, sustainability transitions. So when our group started thinking about our project, we of course wanted to provide practical lessons and solutions to both COVID and sustainability challenges. But we also thought it would be useful to provide a conceptual framework, or sort of that big picture illustration of how sustainability transitions occur. First, what are sustainability transitions from the multi-level perspective? Well, if we're discussing them within the urban context, you can think of them as cross-sectoral shifts towards more sustainable patterns of production, consumption, and distribution. And these shifts are not only technological, but they also have a social dimension. So for example, if you think about an electric vehicle as being one aspect of a shift towards sustainability in the transportation sector, it consists of not only technologies like batteries and infrastructure, like charging stations, but also markets, policies, consumer preferences, and so on. So let me direct your attention to the figure on the right. If you look at the y-axis, you will see three distinct levels. These are labeled niche, regime, and landscape. And so transition starts at the niche level, where innovations are nurtured in protected spaces until they mature and they're ready for market competition. This process of maturation is called upscaling. And in order for innovations to upscale, they must overcome a variety of challenges, such as higher initial costs, issues of social acceptance, but also resistance from the regime. And now the regime consists of incumbents, or those who are invested in the existing system, and they're locked into place by existing patterns of production, consumption, and distribution. And now here lies the source of crises. So incumbents and systemic lock-in promote incremental change and resist radical innovations that lead to systemic change. However, landscape changes such as war, climate change, pandemics place pressure on the regime, and they open up windows of opportunity for the upscaling of niche innovations. Now, generally, sustainability transitions occur in three phases, and those are depicted at the bottom of the figure, or the x-axis. First is the emergence phase, where innovations are, well, emergent and shielded from market selection in protective spaces. The second phase, diffusion, occurs when niche innovations move from their protective spaces to the market. And lastly, during the reconfiguration stage, niche innovators become the new regime and new lock-ins set in. Now, there's a lot more that could be said, but I'll leave it at that to make just one last point. While I just spent the last few minutes talking about generalized processes, it's important to recognize that transition processes are unique. While cities have different leadership models and they employ diverse strategies, they do share similar challenges, whether that be from COVID or from climate change. And because of this, the lessons and innovative sustainability solutions they share can be replicated, adapted, or tailored by other cities to help them meet their own sustainability challenges, thereby forming what Ruth Katz from the Brookings Institute refers to as this new circuitry of urban innovation. Next slide, and I'm going to flip it back over to Amy. Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you very much, Jenna. So we have one case study which we have recorded, which is available for you to watch. There's a link to it below on the slide. And so we've chosen Frome Town Council as our first case study, and that's with the resilience, was actually resilience manager now, Anna Francis. And both Anna and Frome Town Council are really dynamic, and sustainability is at the core of everything they do. And so they're only a town council, so that Frome has 27,000 residents. So, you know, we're talking about a relatively small scale, but it's really incredible what they've managed to achieve. And so if you click on the link, you'll be able to see an interview that I did with Anna. And there's also some further links to the work that she's done in Frome Town Council. So I hope that that's helpful to you. Thanks. Yeah, so there's the link. And there's also some, you know, that's from the front page of Frome Town Council, some stuff that they've done. So it's got a whole kind of COVID-19 response, which is really robust. So I recommend you look at it as well. Thank you. Next slide.
Okay, thank you, Amy, Liga, and Jenna, for your wonderful exposition. I'm sure you all agree with me that in a short time we've accomplished quite a lot, and there's been amazing commitment. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank everybody involved. But at the same time, I'd also like to invite all of you to come in with your ideas, and also with any local action case studies or examples that you may be aware of. The next steps for our group, which you're also welcome to join, is to engage with other platforms, local government platforms in particular, to launch the open letter and the sustainable local development platform, so that the compendium will grow. And we also want to develop a workable online interface, so you know, to register a domain for that platform. At the moment, we have a WordPress document, and I've dropped the link into the chat. And finally, we would like to engage directly with local authorities and hear from them about how we can tailor our platform to their needs. And I think the case studies will help us in doing that, because we are conducting interviews. So the first one was with Frome City Council that Amy just mentioned, but there are others in the pipeline. So from that, then we can also move on to develop a really effective survey, an online survey on that experience of the actual interviews. Okay, that's all for now. Thank you.
Claudia, I think it's back over to you then.
Yes, we have a question here from Robert. I don't have your surname. We're gonna unmute you if you're there and would like to ask your question live. I'll maybe pass on to another person.
He might be having trouble with his microphone. Claudia, do you want to ask the question for him?
Yes. So Robert is saying, have you any advice for swimming upstream? So many forces are conspiring to return back to normal, national, state, provincial, regional, and local. How can local actors pivot the discourse and advance the idea of sustainability in a post-COVID world?
I'm well aware of that. We have in Australia, where I've spent most of my life, we have a COVID commission that's stacked with coal industry lobbyists and recommending coal seam gas projects. You know, I mean, I understand what you're saying, but on the other hand, I also believe that in this COVID crisis, governments have been put to the test, and people have noticed where, at which level, and in which countries, you know, governments have performed better or worse. And I think, you know, there's also a bit of pressure for greater accountability coming from that. So it's also an opportunity. But yes, there's always the other side, the pushback. And I wanted to quickly also respond to a question from Catherine Binge in the chat. Will it be possible to sign the open letter? We hadn't considered that, but that's a great idea. We should perhaps present it to this community for a signature. That would certainly add weight to it. Thank you.
So next question from John Case. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
Yes, I appreciate the presentation. Thank you very much. I'm wondering if you've thought of how to measure progress and how things are coming along. My question was, are there any standardized hard metrics to measure progress in meeting sustainability transitions, and you know, especially scalable ones that can maybe connect local, regional, state, and international or national government initiatives?
The short answer is no. We haven't got an inbuilt mechanism for that, but I would imagine it's possible technically to ask visitors to the site who have been inspired by it to actually leave a testimony. That would be possible. I don't know, maybe it's not enforceable, but voluntary. I think that would be a good idea to have that option.
Can I just add to that?
Sure.
So I think, you know, obviously there are various indicators that have been developed as part of like the SDGs, and then also One Planet Living has worked with some partners to develop some indicators. And I think that's something that we should really seek to embed within our compendium as we kind of look at things holistically, by looking at the kind of deeper transition processes and through our case studies, looking at the initiatives and try and embed like quantitative and qualitative ways that we can track the different progress towards these goals, and actually also work with, for instance, bioregional, the SDGs and other partners that we've identified, so that we can generate processes for, I know that, for instance, in Drift, they're working on looking at reflexive monitoring and evaluation, which is a really exciting thing that I think would be helpful as kind of on the go monitoring and evaluation for local government. So embedding a culture of monitoring and evaluation through what we're doing, I think is definitely something we'd like, well, I personally like to consider, and we should discuss more. So yeah. Yeah,
that's a great point, actually. Yes.
It seems to me that that you might take some of the ready-mades from perhaps, you know, the largest standardized language from ISO or the like, you know, that they have already kind of thought through a lot of these structures, and you might be able to borrow directly from ISO.
Yeah, great, thank you.
Thank you.
I think we need you on the team. Please contact us.
Okay. Thanks very much.
We will have to move on onto our next presentation. Maury?
All right, well, thank you. And I have sort of special powers in order to be able to connect John with Thomas and the rest of the local governance team.
Thank you.
So thank you to the group. And just to reiterate that the four speakers that have been featured in the presentation today are just the lead representatives of a much larger assemblage of colleagues who are involved in this particular stream of working group activity. So for anybody who would like to join the Slack space and the Slack channel that the working group on local governance has been engaged in, there will be opportunities to do that, and we'll be able to pass along that information as well. So we're running a little bit behind schedule, but I think that's okay. We'll catch up for it a little bit further on down the road. I wanted to introduce for the next session my colleagues Stephen McGreevy and Ashley Colby, who are representatives of what has evolved into a combined force of two pre-existing working groups, one focused on sustainable practices and lifestyles, and one focused on the future of sustainable consumption and production. Title of their presentation is From Locking Down to Locking In, Global Dialogues and a Glimpse into Changes to Everyday Life and Social Practices. So I think we're going to begin with Stephen, and so Stephen, I'll pass it over to you.
Great. Can everybody hear me? I think I'm okay.
Yep, you're good.
Good evening, good afternoon, good morning to those of you joining us from around the world. My name is Stephen McGreevy. I'm based in Japan at the Research Institute for Humanity and Nature, and I'm joined by Ashley Colby from the Rhizoma Field School in Colonia, Uruguay, and she'll be talking a little bit later. We'll be presenting on some work that is the culmination of many people's contributions. We're part of, as Maury mentioned, a working group on sustainable consumption and production systems and practices. Next slide, please. So it goes without saying, but we are at a crossroads looking forward. And this is a chance for transition towards something other than what we considered normal only a few months ago. Our working group is focused on how everyday life has changed during the pandemic and whether or not we can lock in some of the positive changes that we're seeing to indeed move forward in a more sustainable way. We may be reiterating some of the things that Neil was mentioning in his talk, but I don't think it should be much of a problem. Can we go to the next slide? Great. So I'm going to just go through a few slides that introduce some polls and survey numbers that have come out to look at different dimensions of everyday life and how they've been changing. For example, here, if you take a look at patterns of work, for a significant portion of people, the pandemic has brought a move toward working at home. I know it has for me and many of my colleagues here at the Research Institute for Humanity and Nature. In one survey that compiled data from 15 different countries, around 46 people who never worked from home previously now plan to work from home more often in the future. But of course, this new work dynamic has created issues for work-life balance and issues around that. We see, for example, in the US, 54% of people in a survey felt more stressed working from home. In Japan, the absence of the morning commute has been seen as a positive change, along with fewer meetings, more energy, and more time for the family. Next slide. Overall consumption of materials and energy has plummeted during the pandemic for most every sector of the economy. And the lockdown has sort of reduced consumer spending to only the essentials. You can see here groceries. If you click forward, the animation should start. Next part. You can see here some household supplies and home entertainment, for example. Click on the next forward, thank you. And of course, then a lot less energy is being consumed through travel, both internationally and domestically. Next slide. So an area that many have become very cognizant of are sort of spatial issues, housing and access to or use of public space. We can see here that in the US, public spaces play an important role for people. as they're able to sort of social distance and also get some fresh air. Life in Japan, where houses and apartments are relatively small, we can see that the majority polled here felt constrained in their homes. You can note that this data is coming from places like Tokyo and Nagoya and Osaka, where apartment size is quite small. Next. In terms of food, we've seen a rise in interest in growing food from home for those that have a garden or a yard that's big enough, sometimes on terraces, for those living in more urban places as well. And of course, eating habits may be changing and to accommodate the need for more cooking from home and planning to make it through the week. There's also been a kind of enthusiastic move toward buying local fresh produce. Here's a survey from the UK on the right that saw a massive increase in orders for community-supported agriculture, or what are known as CSAs, and box schemes over the course of the pandemic. Next slide. So in terms of mobility, I already mentioned the lack of travel, but many are saying that they'll try to shift away from driving to more walking or cycling after the lockdown, or just drive less altogether. At least 1 in 10 polled in the US have canceled a personal trip because of the pandemic. And the photo on the upper right is sort of an example of what may be the future of flying, where the middle seat sort of has a protective barrier in between. Next slide. Great. And so have people's values changed at all? What about their worldview or their motivation to engage politically, for example, organizing locally? For some, it seems that leading a less materialistic or more sustainable or conscientious life after the virus may be an attractive option. And if you click for the next portion of the slide, yeah, there are many also that are calling for governments to act with the same sense of urgency on climate change as they have with the coronavirus. And with that, my slides are over. I will move over to Ashley to describe then some of the activities that our working group has been up to. Go ahead, Ashley.
Thanks, Stephen. So one of the sort of projects that came out of our working group in our Slack space, sort of a few people identified the need to just start collecting submissions of personal narratives, just sort of qualitative data discussing you know, what it is we're all experiencing. So we put together a document and asked people in our groups to reflect on sort of what are the major changes in their lives, whether or not those changes have resulted in more or less resource use, what changes might persist. And we received 10 submissions from 7 countries, so that was hopeful. We got some diversity there, but primarily the people who responded were women in academia, because that is who primarily makes up some of these working groups. And then the submissions were anywhere between 300 and 1,100 words. Next slide, please. So I went through the submissions that we have so far and did just some basic coding for themes to see what it is people are really talking about. And I think of this project as sort of a pilot for beginning to understand the qualitative aspects, or what people identify themselves, their own experiences of sustainable transitions and lifestyles in the midst of this crisis. And a lot of this actually mirrors what Neil spoke about, his own personal experience. So I found that interesting. First, people talked about creative social connections, doing board games online, reconnecting with people further away via online messaging, Meeting up with distance, sharing food with neighbors, this sort of mutual aid idea. Time with immediate family, obviously when people are stuck at home, they're sort of developing new shared activities with their children or partner. Newly taking an interest in things like board games or outdoor play. One quote that exemplifies this is, "I almost never had such dedicated time with my growing daughters." People are interested in growing food, learning to grow food for the first time, or spending more time in the community garden. One person said, "I have become more interested in going into large-scale farming." Obviously, the concern for being able to access food. Cooking at home. Next slide, please. Obviously, unnecessary travel moved online, although some recent research has come out calling into question how sustainable this actually is when comparing all the emissions in total. But just an interesting point that arose. And then for me, the most interesting point that arose as a theme in this group was this theme of self-improvement. The self-improvement is quite varied, but I find it a really interesting point that probably deserves to be delved into a little bit more deeply in future research. So I'm going to read a few quotes here. "I appreciate the importance of life more and to be more appreciative of each day that I wake up. Greater appreciation for nature. A new healthy morning routine of yoga, meditation. More resilient and adaptable to accept change and come up with solutions that work for our family and needs. This bad experience has made us into more capable people. And we've begun to educate ourselves financially and start thinking beyond bank dependency, deeper introspection and dialogue with others." So for me, this is sort of the beginning point to develop this project further. Next slide, please. Thanks. So there are two ways to get involved with this particular personal narratives project. One, you can follow the link that Esty should be posting in the Zoom chat right now. And you can share your narrative and share your experience in this Google form. You can make it as short or as long as you'd like. If you'd like to use this data for a project, for some sort of research or activist project or art project, get in touch with me and I can put you in the Slack space and we can develop this project further. And I will toss it back to Stephen now.
Great, thanks, Ashley. So just a few more slides to close things out. The other big activity we've been involved in is a survey. But looking at all these trends and reflecting on how everyday life has changed, there are still some big questions that remain. And essentially, will these changes be retained or locked in, and are they for the better, and in what way? Slide, please. So whether or not some of these changes are actually more sustainable or not is pretty debatable. This is some research that was released a few weeks ago by the University of Manchester that shows a very mixed bag in terms of how sustainable some of these changes may be. And there are questions, though, that remain, and we're interested in exploring these through a global survey. Could you click? You see there's a column essentially that has a lot of question marks. Go to the next slide. So this survey that has been the main kind of thrust of the working group's activities has a few objectives. First, to sort of identify lifestyle changes in the short term and explore willingness and desire for long-term adoption. But also sort of identify factors that would help and hinder long-term adoption. There are various sectors that are essentially presented today. But as I presented, there's been polls that have focused on specific domains like this already. But what we hope to achieve with this survey is to see how these changes or lack of changes are connected systemically. And these practices sort of interconnect in different ways. And it's important to see how these domains interconnect and compose new lifestyles. And so we hope to replicate this survey worldwide. Future Earth is a platform that allows us to do this relatively easily, which is great. Yeah, another important point would be that we would try to do this soon, but also in the future to sort of gauge whether or not certain practices have actually been locked in or not. Next slide. Great. And so this is just a list of all the contributors to the COVID survey on everyday practices. And I'd just like to thank them all now for their help and for their efforts. So that's it for us. Essentially, we hope to share some of the results of the survey with you all soon, but any reactions or questions or advice would be most welcome. Thanks.
Well, thanks, Stephen. I really appreciate the immediately prior slide that really gave attention and visibility to the fact that what we're seeing here today in this session is really just the kind of tip of the iceberg, and that the speakers here today are the sort of leadership of respective working groups, and that in virtually all cases there's quite a number of other people who are standing off to the into the wings and have been contributing in important and meaningful ways. So Claudia, I pass it back over to you for I see there's been quite a number of questions posed in the Q&A bar.
Yes. Dennis, I would like to give you the floor to pose your question now, please. Can you hear us?
I can hear you, Claudia.
Yes. Yeah, because it was the second time Dennis was asking this question, so he was kind of keen to ask it, and I wanted him to talk. But I will just ask you the second, the most voted question now. So someone is saying these are interesting, but these. No, it just went to another question. These changes are based on people's willingness to give up some rights for the greater good, but is often based on privilege, and also may point to more worrying trends, especially with a rise of the right in many corners of the world. How do we ensure that the new reality that is locked in is inclusive and fair? Is inclusive and fair both locally and globally? I apologize, but these questions keep moving up and down.
Great. Yeah, no, this is a really important question, and you know, I don't have the answers offhand. I think through the survey, one of the things that we need to be sensitive to is to make sure that we're really sampling, you know, a diverse sort of sector of society, and not just this sort of, you know, as we're talking about, a sort of privileged subsection of the population. There are people that are struggling to make ends meet, that are on the front lines, that are struggling more or less with this pandemic, and it's not some kind of vacation from work or whatever it has been previously. So within the survey, we would hope to capture those stories and try to see how what sort of challenges these people face and how they may be able to lock in more sustainable practices through that.
I can add to that also.
Go ahead.
I think it's really important to note that from the dialogues where the narratives that I pulled from, I focused on the positive aspects, but there were plenty of negative aspects worthy of discussing. So I think it's important to acknowledge that this is not just one thing. It's a both and situation where it can be both an opportunity for locking in sustainability transitions and a situation in which the poor are getting poorer and the rich are getting richer in this sort of, you know, theoretical way. So I acknowledge that there's a bunch of questions about privilege and about demographics. I think that it's really it's just super important for all of us as researchers to make sure that we're including varied perspectives. In the survey, we have intention to be piloting the survey in different countries around the world and including multiple demographics. But I'd also encourage you to come and put your narrative in the Narratives Project as well, so we can have multiple voices represented.
Maury, do we have time for another question?
My mute button off there. Sorry, Claudia. Yeah, why don't we take one more and then we'll move to your group, actually.
Okay, so Dennis is back. Dennis, would you like to talk now, please?
I think he's still struggling, Claudia. Do you want to ask his question for him?
Dennis, you have to unmute.
Yeah, you have to accept when we unmute you, there is a notice and you have to accept it. But I can read your question for you, which I think is more of a comment. You say, we now see that the food supply chain system itself is thrown into question thanks to COVID-19 as the wheels threaten to come off the proverbial apple cart. How do we deal ethically and balance the just enough, just in time approach that drives most of our economy with the need of food security, hyper-local food systems, and sustainable supply chains? Adding to this is that the North American consumption patterns move away from service sector to cook-at-home meals becoming the new norm. Steve or Ashley, do you want to comment on this?
I could take this, Steve, since I...
Go ahead.
I love this comment. I'm actually quite heartened by what's happening in the U.S. As it's becoming clear that the sort of just-in-time system and the centralized slaughterhouses, for example, are extremely precarious. And I've been reading a lot about how sort of this precarious, efficient system is pretty much the opposite of resilience. So we can sacrifice some efficiency by making more localized food systems, and we'll gain resiliency. So I think that I'm heartened on the one hand because you know, these people are being made aware of how the system works and that it is not sustainable and that we need to move to local and small scale. On the other hand, the transition period is rough and difficult for a lot of people to go through the experience of hunger when these supply systems fail. So, you know, again, like I said before, it's sort of a both and situation, but I think it's certainly something that's definitely changing as a result of this and something to watch closely. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Steve.
No, I think that was great. Thank you, Ashley, and thanks everyone.
Okay, well, thank you, Stephen and Ashley, and great work on behalf of what we refer to as Group 3.5. Again, just to sort of reiterate that that what is really truly remarkable about this initiative is that many of the people who are now working together and collaborating in such an effective way have only just come together in the last month and a half into these groups. So this is a process that has been quite quickly catalyzed, and it's really quite remarkable and quite frankly humbling to see such important progress being made. So we're going to now turn to the third presentation on the agenda. Featured in this session is Marula, Claudia, Nadiana, and Felix, who will be speaking about who cares for women, the importance of care work in the time of COVID-19. And I think this begins to get at some of the other questions that were posed that we weren't able to bring formally to the floor during the last session. So I'm not sure. I guess is it Marula or Claudia who is going to take the lead on this?
Hello, yeah, this is Marula.
Marula,
can you hear me?
The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So yeah, we are a group. We came together, start discussing issues of paid and unpaid care work. And we suddenly understood that the topic is way more complex than we initially thought. And not only because it has been traditionally overlooked in the literature of pandemics, but also because it touches upon issues of gender equality, feminist economics, and intersectionality. So I will give a short introduction. Can we go to the next slide, please? So if we imagine the actual economy as an iceberg, then the top of the iceberg, which is well above the water, includes goods and services produced in the economy and measured by GDP. However, an iceberg is mainly below the water and may not be immediately visible. Domestic labor, often carried by women, like care work for children, elder people, and the sick member of the society, is vital, but not measured and thus invisible and often taken for granted. So as we can see in the graph here in the slide, globally, women spend around 4.4 hours per day doing unpaid care work, and men only 1.4 hours. This amounts to an estimated 4 years extra unpaid work over the course of the lifetime of women compared to men. And this shows clearly that the care work burden falls on the shoulder of women. If we can go to the next slide, please. The issue of gender, especially related with care work, has been overlooked in the literature of pandemics. For example, we came across a recent research that reviews article regarding Ebola and Zika outbreaks. And this research found that only 1% of published research discussed gender issues. This is very important, and it has a lot to do with the tyranny of the urgent, which is a term that refers to policies that tend to prioritize biomedical needs and health issues over other social issues and gender discussions. For this reason, we consider it's really important to include gender discussion and especially care work in the core of all policy debates around COVID-19 and sustainability. So especially if we talk about the present COVID-19 crisis and the total lockdown that we all experienced and changed our everyday life, we can see that according to the United Nations report, more than 1.5 billion children were out of school during the shutdown. This increased the need for childcare, which now cannot be shared among neighbors and grandparents due to the need for social distancing. For this reason, the formal and informal care falls mostly more heavily on women. Some initial data already published show the trend. For example, data from the US show that COVID-19 shock is likely to put a disproportionate burden of care on women. Similar data came also from Bangladesh, Philippines, Australia, and the conclusions are always the same. We should also keep in mind that in many cases, women already did the majority of childcare before the pandemic. So we can expect that this trend will continue as the main factors which initially led to this, like for example, power relations, established social norms, and role models will persist if not amplified. And of course, except from the unpaid care work, there are also many female health workers, community-based health workers, domestic workers, and long-term care workers who also provide essential but poorly paid care work. So yeah, I came across a discussion also in the chat, and in our group, we decided to take a different approach and provide a different angle. So we're going to discuss the care work given by immigrant women, which Claudia will present in the next slide. And then we're going to focus on the case of Indonesia. So I leave the floor to Claudia.
Thanks, Marula. So actually, a substantial part of our economy depends largely on migrants. And out of the around 164 million migrant workers in the world, 68 million are women. As we can see from the graph here, both genders surpass the non-migrants in terms of labor. Now, we have to remember that migrants are a very heterogeneous group. They perform different types of jobs across multiple sectors and also with different pay rates. But our focus here is on the high number of migrant workers that find themselves in vulnerable contexts. So their working conditions they are often employed in roles that continue to perpetuate traditional gender roles, such as household work and care work. These are often of low status and poorly remunerated. And they are also more vulnerable because they are often self-employed or performing temporary work, so suffering more from economic downturns. So they are also more likely to be employed below their actual education levels when they come to destination countries. So with a current global aging population, it is expected that the demand for health and social care will increase, which will create a care deficit. And often it is women that fill in this gap, and particular migrant women in both home and institutional settings. And by doing this, they end up risking their own health and well-being because often the context where they are in do not protect them or give them enough rights. Next slide, please. So regardless of their social, cultural, and economic contributions, what we see is that women often go unnoticed by their political systems, those political systems that should be responsible for their integration and protection. And with this pandemic, it is expected that women have an overload of care work. As Marilla said, they are having to spend more time at home, or because they already do work that is largely unpaid, but also the travel restrictions and social isolation makes it more difficult for domestic workers to travel to work. And then this ends up with them having economic consequences that can put them in a vulnerable position and lead to sexual exploitation. So there is also greater insecurity that migrant women might have little access to protective equipment such as masks or alcohol, and also because they often live in crowded places. Then we also see discrimination often happening towards migrants. I can speak of a case when the pandemic started in Italy. Far-right wing politicians made statements such as, we need to close our borders because COVID-19 is being brought by migrants. So this is the kind of stigmatization that then blocks their access to health and social care. And also we are seeing a lot of gender-based violence being exacerbated also because of this labor uncertainty and in terms of what is their economic status going to be going forward. So I'll pass it on to Nadiana now, that will present you a case study of unpaid care work from women in Indonesia.
Thank you, Claudia. Next, please. I will talk about the case study in Indonesia about unpaid care work. What we define as unpaid care work in here includes doing house chores such as cleaning, doing the dishes, meal preparation, taking care of children, elderly, and sick family members. And there is imbalance proportion between men and women who carry out unpaid care work, where only % of men from them carry out unpaid care work. Meanwhile, the number of women who carry out unpaid care work in Indonesia is 10 times, which is 37.86%. And there is nearly 60% of women who are currently giving unpaid care work said that they had previously worked, and they are mostly working in formal sector and are skilled workers. And this number is higher in urban areas with more than 60% and only 39.6
Nediana, we're having trouble hearing you.
Claudia, Marula, I think we may need to move on to the next slide. Seems to be a bandwidth or a connection problem.
Yes, I've just written to everyone in the chat. Nadiana is in Indonesia and it has been a rainy day and she's having trouble with her connection. Nadiana, are you back or?
Can someone step in for Nadiana to finish her presentation?
Marula?
Okay.
Felix, yes.
Yeah, I don't know if Felix can take over or summarize a little bit the results of Nediana. Well, I could take over. So basically, her case study in Indonesia found out that unpaid care work. Oh, sorry. Yeah. That unpaid care work falls extremely on the shoulder of women, and we now face more challenges as they carry totally the unpaid work, and especially homeschooling, as the children are not able to go to school. The 45% of respondents from the online survey that Indiana carried do not agree that work from home makes them more productive, while 60% of the respondents do not agree that work from home decreases their workloads. And from 16th of March until the 19th of April, there were 97 reports of violence against women, which is very much connected with what Claudia said before, and shows that there's a pattern of increased violence during the shutdown. 33 of the report cases were domestic violence, 30 cases are gender-based violence, and 34 are different kinds of violence, including rape. Going back a little bit to the role of women in the house, it was also reported that women are responsible for teaching and assisting their children's schoolwork, leaving them very few hours to do the other things they take over in their house, like domestic chores, take care of their partners who are also working from home, and they at the same time they also have to take care of their career and their work. And I hope I said everything Diana wanted to say, and I will pass it now to the next slide and to Felix.
Okay, thank you very much. As we've mentioned, the care economy plays an essential role in our global development. And we need to take some concrete actions to make sure that we can harness its positive contributions and minimize the negative ones. So we talked about some roles that can be, some measures that should be taken. And one is that some years ago, the global community came together to form the SDG goals as a blueprint for global development and a better future for all. One of the key themes in the SDGs is leaving no one behind. When we deal with the issues of the care economy, or we relate the care economy with the leaving no one behind, it brings a sense of urgency and makes it more relatable. The care economy also, when aligned with the SDGs, you can see that, for example, with inequality, overcoming gender challenges, social, having decent work and economy. All of these, when we deal with them, they directly and indirectly contribute to achieving these SDGs. So we need to align more the care economy with the ideas of the SDGs. Also, there's a need for us to address the underlying needs of the care economy, both the paid and the unpaid, and recognize that the large and unequal contribution of women's unpaid care work and its contribution to the formal labor markets. So in different parts of the world, we realize that in some areas, the formal market is more predominant, whilst in some areas, the informal market is more predominant. And you find the care economy being saturated by women. So in different parts of the world, we have to see where the care economy is the nature of the care economy, so that we can better deal with their challenges. Also going forward, it's important that women have an equal and significant representation in all recovery measures and planning, decision making for post-COVID recovery. Next slide, please. Okay. There's also a lot of abuse in the care economy. As my colleagues mentioned earlier, it's often dominated by people from quite difficult backgrounds and involved in precarious employment. So abuse is very rampant in this area. And there's a need for us to improve the regulation in the care economy to limit exposure to harm and the associated risks, including gender-based violence. In the COVID situation, there's been a spike in gender-based violence across the globe, both in the Northern Hemisphere and the Southern Hemisphere, which tells us that it's something which is common all over and not only the challenge of a certain part of the world. Then there's a need for us to increase education and awareness creation about care work. Often there's a notion that the care work is the preserve of females, but then when we take care of issues relating to females, it's the same as taking care of issues which affect humanity. Women's issues are human issues, which we also need to take care of. And we need to change that notion that is a preserve of females and see it as the responsibility of all. My colleagues talked about the situation with migrants workers. In the COVID pandemic, migrants, workers, refugees have come to the fore, providing essential roles in the care economy. And in this regard, going forward, it will be important to facilitate access of migrant women to health and social security systems as a means of improving the regulation of the care economy. Next slide, please. So we also need to invest more in care work as a means of narrowing the gender pay gap. I mentioned earlier that addressing the underlying factors in the care economy contributes directly and indirectly to realizing the SDGs and especially the Leave No One Behind agenda. So when we address these issues, it contributes to, for example, gender inequality, social inequality, decent work, and well-being. This will reduce overall inequality and help redress the exclusion of women from decent jobs. And when we looked at the issue of the care economy, we could see that, especially in developing nations, women employment is often concentrated in the informal sector, unlike in the Northern Hemisphere. So there is a need also to have more of gender aggregated data, which will help us in addressing the challenges in the care economy. And in case of the Global South, they address the underlying issues in the informal sector. We believe that these are some of the measures that we can advance going forward to help enhance the situation in the care economy and improve its contribution to the global economy. Thank you.
Okay, Paul, are you going to run the Q&A session?
Yes, yeah, we'll do, Maury.
Okay.
Lots of comments thanking the presenters for sharing their perspectives on this very important topic. We'll start with the most upvoted question, and we're not going to call on Christoph because we don't want to be responsible for waking up sleeping babies. So, but Christoph asks, I would like to ask the presenters what thoughts they have about the proposal by some feminist degrowth scholars for a care income instead of a basic income, foregrounding social recognition of unpaid and gendered care work. Over to you.
Yeah, I'll take over this question. Yeah, it's true that I've recently also come along the discussion of the feminist degrowth group FADA calling for a care income, and I think it's very important. Of course, basic income has traditionally been in the core, one of the core policies of the degrowth debate. And I think when we talk about care income, we will have to be very careful, especially because we don't want to put the care economy under the same profit maximization logic that has brought us where we are now. So yes, a care income is welcome the same way basic income is welcome. But I guess we'll have to be very careful when we talk about care labor and care income, and to shift a little bit our logic behind what we consider now as, like, measure care income in the GDP terms, or just abolish GDP measurements totally and think on a different sphere. So I totally believe that care income will empower women, and especially women who do unpaid care job now. But I also think we need to be very cautious under which term we discuss care income and care labor. I hope, Christoph, this answered your question.
Thank you, presenters. We had an early comment question from Marisol da Silva as well. And perhaps you could just say a little bit more about your review of the pandemic literature, where you found only 1% of studies mentioning care. She's wondering whether you've published that, or whether you could just say a little bit more about it.
No, that was a review published already forwarded to her. So yeah, it was not our review. It was a review focused on Ebola and Zika, saying that the gender discussion is not really part of the publication. So yeah, I sent the article on the chat. Okay.
We could take one more question, Maury, if we've got time. Another one that I can't go to is another anonymous attendee. Again, thanks for sharing their perspectives. This respondent thinks it's the responsibility of researchers in sustainability to always take into perspective the voices of minority groups, including women and migrant workers. Her question, the respondent's question to the speakers is to ask them to share about their personal experience of gender discrimination in academia.
Yes, I can talk a little bit about that, but before discussing the gender discrimination in academia, I just want to comment a little bit on the women and migrant women that person mentioned before. There is a constant discussion of how do we make sure the responses are being developed and taking into account the multiple intersectional crises people face. And what we see is that migrants have not been taken care of. We see the reproduction of wrongdoing policies. So one thing I would say is that we urgently need national legal protection for migrants if we want to move this issue forward. Of course, that some of the impacts we talked about COVID-19 are going to be immediate, and some are going to be more long-term impacts. But if we are capable of addressing some of the issues we already had in the past now, then we will also have a better response towards the long-term impacts. Now, it is interesting that you mentioned the gender discrimination in academia, because we were just talking about this one of these days. There's an article that came out in The Guardian saying that during this pandemic, men are being able to publish more scientific articles than women, because of course women have to be at home taking care of their child and doing all the unpaid work we've been talking about so far in this presentation. So I can share that news link, which is really interesting, a point, you know, with a lot of us women struggling with publications at the moment.
Thank you, presenters. Maury, I think it's coffee cocktail time.
Great. Thanks, Paul. Yeah, so what we're going to do is take a 8-minute break that will bring us to 1/4 past the hour. And so this is an opportunity to refill your glass or grab your breakfast or catch some quick dinner, and then very promptly come back to your current position, and we will then begin at 1:15 with a presentation that picks up on many of these same themes and is specifically focused on the way in which the pandemic has been playing out in countries of the global south. So thanks for your attention and your patience with us thus far. Do not walk away too far. We'll see you all back here in just about 7 minutes. So we'll run the webinar with the current slide on the screen, and look forward to seeing you back here in just a few minutes. Okay, we are back. I just need to double check with the technical crew to make sure everybody else is back in post. Joe, are you there? Joe? Claudia, Paul?
Yes, I am here. I'm running a poll right now. We have about 4 minutes into the poll. We have 113 of 190 people responding on their location.
Oh, I didn't get to respond myself, so let me do that. Oh, I've got to scroll down to find my place.
And we have the next presentation ready to go almost. We need to bring people in. Paul, please bring in our next panelists.
Yeah, I'm back now, Joe. I can do that.
Okay, so hopefully everybody else is finding their way back to their nice, comfortable spots. We're going to begin the second half of the program with a presentation by Katharina Schiller, Vipashi Ghosh, Mark Purdon. The topic of their presentation is sustainability transitions in the global south. And they're going to be highlighting a series of subsequent events and activities that they are going to be coordinating over the next several months. So we will, Katerina, are you there? Yes, I see you are. So let me pass things over to you and the rest of your team. And we look very much forward to your presentation. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks, Maury. Yeah, thanks for having us. We're excited to be here. And before we start off, our group, we talk about sustainability transitions in the global south, and especially now looking at the impacts of COVID-19 in these different political, social, economic contexts. We were seeing a lot of initiatives, good initiatives, also bad, but of course also good, and examples coming up that were not being focused on so much in the discussion, that were possibly a little neglected. And so this group really came together to broaden the discussion around COVID-19, to really go global and to shine some light on these positive initiatives that are having and that we're seeing coming out of global south contexts. So my name is Katharina Schiller. I'm from Fraunhofer Institute for Systems and Innovation Research in Karlsruhe. And today with my colleagues Vipashi Ghosh, Mark Purdon, and Adriana Marotti Di Melo, we're going to be introducing our initiative, our network, and our initiative, which my colleagues will talk about. But I want to make sure, as has been said before, that you know that we are just the tip of the iceberg of people working on this. We have working on this. We have a lot of colleagues all around the world supporting us on these initiatives. Next slide, please. So who are we? Well, we're a network, international network of scholars. We have just shy of 300 members. We usually commute through a Google group. And we're a thematic group of the Internet of the Sustainability Transitions Research Network, STERN. So within that network, which is a global group of scholars working on socio-technical sustainability transitions, our group focuses on these dynamics towards sustainability that are happening in the global south context. So primarily in Asia, Africa, Latin America, but also elsewhere in the geographic or contextual global south. We've been around since 2015. We were formed by a group of interested scholars at the International Sustainability Transitions Conference in Brighton, UK. And since then, we're a voluntary group. We come together around these issues also on an ad hoc basis. We're self-organized. Everyone, of course, is self-funded. And key activities that we've been involved with as a network have been webinar series that we host, and also hosting debates on Global South issues at the International Sustainability Transitions Conference and within the network. Please, feel free to follow us on Twitter. We also have a YouTube channel. And our initiative that we are taking right now is, next slide, please. We are putting together, or we have put together, a webinar series on sustainability transitions in the context of COVID-19 to bring these perspectives from the Global South to the forefront. My colleague, Vipashi, will tell you more about that.
Yes, so thank you, Katrina. So my name is Vipashi. I I work at the University of Sussex Science Policy Research Unit here in the UK, and I will talk more about the webinar series. So this is something that we are starting as a series of separate webinars, thematic ones, and it's starting on the 3rd of June, and we have the dates for the first 3 webinars. Next slide, please. Yeah, so I want to talk about the 6 themes that we came up with and we have thought are relevant for the context of Global South. And we will use these themes basically as pillar for our webinar series. And these themes really emerged from the kind of informal brainstorming process we had at the, like thinking about the pandemic and its effect in different countries where we come from and our experiences, also looking at news and publications and thinking about not just the kind of negative impacts like consequences on existing social and economic inequality, with the presence of state fragility, weak institutions, which we all know are some of the characteristics in some countries in the Global South, but also the positives and the kind of real learning that we can do from emerging new social relations, social practices, policy learning, innovation and experimentation that are already happening, that are already emerging in response to the crisis in the last couple of months. So this is really, these are kind of issues and opportunities that are not limited. I must say that these are not limited to the Global South, but also kind of are also can be experienced in the Global North. So broadly speaking, we are interested in understanding dynamics of sustainability transitions, looking at obviously which includes processes, patterns, politics, but also kind of learnings and governance of transition, and both from a historical point of view, but also understanding the future trajectories and how current narratives around the COVID shapes the future transitions. Next slide. Yeah, so as I said, obviously these themes are really flexible and these are not set on stone. So we do have a timeline for the webinar, and the first webinar will start next week, which is more of a broad kind of perspective from Asia, Africa, and Latin America. But over time, we will go into thematic webinars, and the themes are really, so basically we have set the dates, and we will have the webinars on the first week of every month, running up until the end of the year, and basically we will set the themes as it's really dependent on who comes forward in presenting and sharing their research on these particular themes. I somehow don't see the slide. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, and then we will end with a kind of a synthesis, an open forum, thinking about these different aspects that were shared across these webinar series in January. Next slide. So this is really the first look into the poster or how the first webinar will look like. So we have very distinguished panelists from Asia, from South Africa, from Thailand, from South Africa, and Adriana from Sao Paulo will share their kind of experiences and perspectives from these different countries and broader contexts. So, and they will give a kind of an overview of issues and opportunities about these themes. So I think from our perspective, this is a really important webinar that will really reflect on the 6 themes, but also maybe raise more questions. And we are really open to kind of thinking about what are we missing in these 6 themes, and we will have that debate in the first webinar, and it will really set the tone for the subsequent webinars. So I welcome you all to join this first webinar, irrespective of whether your research is on the Global South or not. I will now pass on to Marc for the next slide.
Bonjour, hello. My name is Marc Purdon. I'm assistant professor at l'École des sciences de la gestion à l'Université du Québec à Montréal in Canada. So I just wanted to kind of briefly kind of round out this session by saying that we're hoping that you'll get involved. There are ways that you can, if you're interested in presenting on your work, if you think it's pertinent to this seminar series, webinar series, and to issues of sustainability and transitions and Global South and COVID, then we have, we're looking for presenters. There's a sign up list there. You see the bit.ly web link. We're also open to suggesting some themes. I know we have about 6 of them right now, but if there's something that you think is worthy of attention, please propose it to us. If you're actually just interested in getting more involved with this network, we saw some of the colleagues in Indonesia earlier, we'd be happy to have you get involved. There are a dialogue session that will be coming up in August. To get involved, it's pretty easy. All you have to do is email transitions.globalsouth@gmail.com, and you'll be put on the group's email network. There's also a Twitter feed, and we're a diverse group of team members, and we're always looking for more team members. So with that, I'll go to the next slide. We'll move to questions. Thank you very much.
Okay, Claudia, I'm going to put it back in your hands, and I see there already are a couple of questions that have popped up in the Q&A window.
Yes, Ashley, would you like to come on, please?
Sure. So my question was, if I'm wondering if presenters can speak a little bit about the diversity of the Global South. I think a lot of times researchers in the Global North sort of think of it as this monolithic thing, and I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about not only the diversity, but the resilience that you're seeing as a result of COVID. Thanks.
I'll maybe take a first stab at this, unless we're going to go through a series of questions and then do them as a group. I think there's a lot of divergences in the Global South. A lot of this is due to different historical processes. There are different types of states, for example, in the Global South. There's different levels of industrialization. There are different cultural and social norms. So we see a lot of divergence, a lot of differences. I'm most working on sub-Saharan Africa, and we see tremendous divergences in how the role of the state and non-state actors in the process of economic development. Maybe some of my colleagues will have something to say.
Yeah, and I think it's also, as you note, important to note that a lot of, we are not talking about the Global South. I don't think you can talk about the Global North or the Global South as a monolithic aspect being. Of course, within Global South countries, within regions, there can be huge disparities in social systems, in production systems, in economic systems. And a lot of these contexts that we see, a lot of the issues that we see in the Global South are, of course, like inequalities, for example, social inequalities really starkly reflected in a lot of countries in the Global North. Look at the US, for example. So we don't mean to, we want to provide a glimpse into some of these positive initiatives that are coming up from people who possibly live in different contexts and in different stages of insecurity as well, and to really highlight these and see what we can learn from these as well for different places all around the globe.
Ethan, are you there? Would you like to ask your question?
Unmute. Hi, you can hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'm asking if you're seeing the same kinds of local experimentation in the Global South that we saw this morning. Because when I think about it in my area, it's all on the internet. Actually, Zoom is everywhere. But is technology limiting it in the Global South? Or I know there's a lot of cell phones. So maybe they're using technology differently or non-technological solutions. And of course, Global South, as someone else pointed out, is incredibly diverse, but you kind of have to ask a question. So that's it. Just local innovation in the Global South.
Yes, I can quickly maybe add, but I don't think we have a lot of time to kind of go into the themes. And I welcome you to join the webinar that will be specifically about local experimentation. But what we mean is, because as in the previous presentations, we learned that transitions are socio-technical. So it's not just about technologies and kind of technological interventions, but also the kind of social arrangements and social initiatives, which are also very interesting to study. And I can say that in many Global South countries and contexts, there is a lot happening around kind of social initiatives, very bottom-up, even frugal innovations that are happening, that have always happened, but also kind of popping up in context of tackling this crisis. So I would say that this is broader. I mean, when we say local experimentation, this is broader than say kind of technology and how you can do things virtually, but more kind of on the ground, bottom-up initiatives that communities are initiating and carrying forward, which is really, really interesting stuff to study.
If we have time for one more question, an anonymous person is asking, are there any plans to incorporate policymakers, bureaucrats open to incorporating transitions thinking in the webinar series?
I would think that's a fantastic idea. I'm noting it as we speak. We had not thought about that specifically yet, but again, we are in this iterative bottom-up process of brainstorming these themes, and we very much welcome involvement from you participants and ideas like this. So yeah, that's a fantastic idea, and we're going to definitely think about that and integrate that. Thank you.
Maureen?
Okay, Claudia. Yeah, thank you very much. Well, Katerina, thank you very much. Bipashi, Mark, and to the very large network of colleagues that stand behind you. And we're delighted to have been able to give the slate of forthcoming activities a platform in this session here today, and very much look forward to what will come forth in the coming weeks and months. We are then going to move to our next to last presentation in the formal part of the program. This is a presentation on opportunities around the circular economy for sustainability transitions. This is a group that is going to include, for today's purposes, Joe Sarkis, Paul Duick, and Sarah Strauss. Joe and Paul have been helping to run the backstage operations here today, and so hopefully while they're presenting, we'll still be able to hold things together. So Joe, I pass it over to you and the rest of your team.
Hi, I'm going to start out.
It's Sarah's going to start. Sorry, Sarah.
Yep, I'm going to start. Yep, yeah, we kind of got it flipped over. Next slide, please. All righty. So on May 13th, a group of us held an open forum called An Equitable, Inclusive, and Environmentally Sound Circular Economy. The theme for this forum was framed within the emergent COVID-19 context as a way of engaging the dual challenges of climate change and social justice. Organizers included the three of us and some others from the US and the UK, as well as collaborators from Netherlands, Brazil, China, and Switzerland. We had 630 people pre-registered online from over 50 countries, and we ended up with about 350 participants joining us on the day of the forum. By using Zoom and YouTube platforms as we are today, each with options for commentary, as well as a very useful tool, onlinequestions.com, we were able to record and manage the substantive engagement of our forum attendees for later analysis. This open forum wasn't a webinar, and it wasn't about asking so-called experts to say how the circular economy should be done and how to respond to social justice and concerns and the demands for a lower carbon society. Rather, we live in uncertain times, well, we always do, but now we really know it. So our goal with this event was to stimulate ideas that could be shared during and after the forum, and we are in the process of doing so. Many of you were there as well, and you'll be receiving a report in the next week or so. We expect that the ideas generated will also inform the development of a number of potential outcomes, including further publications. Paul and Joe are going to tell you a little bit more about those efforts in a bit. But first, I'd like to talk to you about the notion of a circular economy and its variants, and why we think it can help us move forward as we make our way through the COVID-19 crisis. The circular economy is not yet an everyday term for most people, though probably most people on this particular event know all about it. But the notion that we need to have a more sustainable and socially equitable way of using this planet's resources so we do not continue to increase greenhouse gas production is something we can all understand. While there are many different definitions of circular economy, most begin with the desire to develop a model that integrates at minimum the 3 R's, reduce, reuse, recycle. We've heard these over and over for decades, but preferably now extending to the 9 R's of podding it all in 2017 to create an economic system that makes the sustainable development goals a priority. The additional strategies begin with refuse and rethink, and at later stages in the product cycle continue to repair, refurbish, remanufacture, repurpose, before coming back full cycle to recover. In taking the notion of a circular economy a bit further, we can engage with Raworth's donut economy, as cities like Amsterdam have recently done, to consider the integration of social justice as well as planetary boundaries. For this, we might also add 2 more R's, redistribution and relationships. Such actions will help us become more resilient in the face of disruption from the current COVID-19 pandemic, as well as helping us respond more effectively to the challenges of present and future climate-related emergencies. The need to make these changes to our 21st century lifeways could not be more pressing, as we have already seen in many presentations today. But what does that mean with regard to solutions? Knowing that the problems we face are out there is not the issue, but rather we need to start developing concrete, actionable solutions that change our business as usual scenarios to new norms that work collaboratively to address global pandemic and changing climate at all scales. The circular economy, as we conceived it in this forum, which is very close to this donut economics I was speaking of, holds promise for redirecting our efforts towards these ambitious but necessary goals. COVID-19 has presented a number of challenges to the already ongoing work in this area. As leaders in Europe and elsewhere find their CE goals threatened by conservative forces that push for return rather than reform. The difficulties that we see are similar to those presented by climate change, but on a different temporal scale of days to months rather than years to decades. But both bring into stark relief the social and economic and health disparities of our current systems, especially in the US and the developing world, and invite us to transform our economic and social ecological systems to be environmentally sustainable and socially just while remaining economically sound. So at our forum, we asked 5 speakers to get us thinking about what an ecologically sensitive and socially just circular economy looks like. 3 of them served as conversation starters, and 2 others helped us move things along halfway through as catalysts. Throughout the forum, attendees were also encouraged to contribute questions and comments, which were monitored and selected. Despite the large numbers, we were able to achieve a good conversation. The interplay was captured and analyzed to help us determine how best to move forward after the event. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. This slide gives a sense of the themes that emerged through these conversations. Our contributors brought up a number of concerns that collectively amount to asking and answering the question, what does it mean to build ethics and responsibility into an economic system? That is, what does the donut economy look like in practice? And beyond that, how can we use our experience with COVID-19 short-term behavioral and ethical responses to help us develop longer-term planetary thinking with social justice in local to global contexts? So I turn now to Paul for further discussion of these emergent themes and responses. Paul?
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Joe. The open forum allowed for many participants to have their say about the consequence of COVID-19 for the circular economy and to help forge a research agenda. Throughout the open forum, rather like today, there was a strong underlying call to understand better the social dimension of the circular economy. This was thought of quite broadly, in terms of equity, gender, solidarity, inclusion. The conversation started with how the needs of communities can be better served by the circular economy business models that combine material conservation, ecological regeneration, and human upliftment. Amongst others, research questions were posed around who will be included in the circular economy, how they will be included, and over what timescale they'll be included, especially given changes to working and domestic routines caused by the pandemic. A second related theme concerned the wider sustainability consequences of responses to COVID-19. There were calls for a more holistic assessment of changes that will follow in response to the pandemic. In other words, how does circularity fit into concepts such as the well-being economy, for example? Are there tensions with the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals? What synergies are there between a post-COVID circular economy achieving a 2050 vision for biodiversity? Other contributors drew attention to actions already taken to address the coronavirus that may hinder the circular economy, at least in the short term. For example, the greater use of safe, and that's in inverted commas, single-use plastics, less availability of recycling services, less reuse of items. How can we overcome or work around these challenges? Thirdly, there was discussion around post-COVID interventions to support transformation in consumption production systems. Speakers envisaged industrial structural change, for example, supporting innovation in green and circular industries, accelerating the decline of industries that don't contribute to the circular economy. The idea here was to build back better rather than going back to normal, but how best to do it. Leverage points could include policies to support the development and diffusion of sustainable innovations, greening the financial market to invest in circular businesses, and so on. Research questions were raised about gaps in our understanding of consumer behaviour and social values, and how we can design interventions to support behavioural change and social transformations. As one participant quite nicely put it, how can we encourage embracing the change we need when many of us are emotionally and otherwise traumatised by the change that has been thrust upon us? How do we care for people while seizing this moment for radical change? Fourth, there was much interest in developing new indicators to measure progress and the development of tools and techniques to support circular economy practices. For example, questions were raised about how COVID-19 will impact design for the circular economy. Going forward, how can we achieve more repairability, more reusability and remanufacturing potential, making supply chains more resilient by relying less on imports and raw materials? How can we encourage the implementation of COVID-motivated cradle-to-cradle ideas in established businesses and startups? How can we use visions and scenarios for the circular economy to help us reduce some of the uncertainty we feel about the future? Fifth, participants acknowledged that transition plans for the circular economy would be, to some extent, context specific. Research was considered necessary around how specific sectors would emerge from the COVID crisis to be part of the circular economy. For example, immediate concerns over the disruptions to food supply chains caused by COVID-19 were noted, with calls for more local agricultural consumption and production. More attention was drawn to regenerative agriculture and the circularity of soil. Then looking across sectors, the issue of new business models was raised. What are our new needs that businesses will help provide post-COVID? And how can we, in the scholarly community, contribute to these developments? Finally, as we emerge from COVID-19, the central role of frontier technologies in the next wave of change was discussed. Digitalization was in the foreground, with the potential for automation and other ICTs help avoid the disruption caused by the outbreak and improve the resilience of supply chains. The question of whether replacing human workforce by robots would facilitate or hinder the circular economy takes us back to this recurring theme of the social dimension of the circular economy. So that gives you a flavour of the many varied discussions we had at the Open Forum, and some of the attendees I can see here today were also there a couple of weeks ago. As well as providing their reflections, participants at the Open Forum also suggested research collaborations on all of those themes that I've talked about and others, and we'll be getting in touch shortly with participants to progress those agendas. And I'll now hand over to Joe to say more about the next steps. Joe.
Thank you, Paul and Sarah. Our Circular Economy and Sustainable Supply Chains post-COVID group has linkages to the SSCP CON for Future Earth and the CE working group. So we're doing a number of joint projects together post-COVID and regular as well. So for this project, what we will be doing is looking at the near future. And the near future means right after our forum and after this mini conference as well. We have identified primarily a number of scholarly projects to support the circular economy as part of the near future post-COVID agenda. Although primarily scholarly, we expect a transdisciplinary contribution, including various non-academic stakeholders such as government, NGO, and industry participants to be involved in some of these scholarly activities that we do or are planning. The virtual open forum provided us with categories and fodder, as Paul has mentioned, for a number of scholarly projects. Our Circular Economy and Sustainable Supply Chains post-COVID group has linkages. Oh, I'm sorry, that's the same thing I just said. The virtual open forum provides us with categories. So in the near future, here's the items that we have. First, we'll provide a summary report of our findings, and we hope to include a link to this report on the Slack channel as well as the YouTube channel, which some people have asked about. We're a little bit behind. We had promised this today, but unfortunately we had a mini conference to attend to, which we are doing right now. Second, we will put together a blog that relates to the forum and some initial insights that we had from the forum, and hopefully we'll be able to place this blog somewhere on the Future Earth site. Third is one of our most ambitious sets of projects, and in this case here, we are planning a series of edited books related to a post-COVID circular economy environment. I should mention that all these are tentative and are early planning stages, and we request participation from all who are interested. The first thing we're doing under 3A is we are considering an overview book on circular economy and general sustainability. The publisher is yet to be determined. We have some colleagues, Rob Kruger, Chiara Farney-Frattini, who are leading on this effort or have volunteered to lead. And then we have two more specific books that are planned. We may have more, we may have fewer. It depends on how the first book arises or moves along. And the first book will be on social equity inclusion in a circular economy context. So far, Cindy Eisenhower and Diego Vasquez-Brust have been identified as initial leads. The second book will cover technology, business, and economics issues, and this effort will be led by me and Aldo Amato at this time. And these latter two books will be part of the Springer Nature Green of Industry series studies. We'll also consider other publishers. And this is an ask, actually, for anyone who is interested. We'll need additional editors, chapter authors, and reviewers, and we made this known at the end of our forum as well. The next scholarly output is the special issues of peer-reviewed journals that we hope to have included here, and each of these, we are hoping, will have a post-COVID aspect to them as well. The first journal that we are targeting for a special issue, and again, we have to write for each of these special issues a call for papers, which we will be doing, will be Local Environment. And in Local Environment is a journal that is about social justice and sustainability. And this effort will be led by Robert Kruger, Wesleyan Ashton, and Chiara Farney-Frattini, who have volunteered to take the lead. Second is a special issue proposed for the journal Resources, Conservation, and Recycling. The topic will be climate change and the circular economy. And the leads for this special issue so far have been Paul Dewick and Yoon Gang. Third is a new journal, which most of us will try to participate in and hopefully guide some of the research and direction. It's called Circular Economy and Sustainability. Jorg Hofstetter and a few of us have been invited to participate in that journal's launch as well. And finally, one that we just had submitted is about sustainable supply chains in a post-COVID environment. And in this one, we made sure that post-COVID issues were introduced, many of them informed by some of the discussions we've been having over the past few weeks. Some of the asks are, of course, we'll need editors, authors, and reviewers. Again, in the near future, we are also planning, similar to some of the other groups, maybe some future forums or webinars around some of these topics. Those are still in the planning stages, and we, again, wish to invite anyone here or otherwise to participate in these activities. So we also welcome everyone to join the Future Earth SSCP Con on our Slack channel, and we have Slack channels for the post-COVID circular economy as well as the circular economy working group. I just wanted to bring these all to your attention. Thank you for your time. And now we will entertain any questions.
Before we turn things back over to Claudia and questions, Joe, maybe if Steve McGreevy is still with us. I know it's extremely late now in Japan, but for folks who are interested in joining the Slack platform, Stephen, perhaps you could say a word or two about how they can go about doing so, or we can put that information as well in the chat box. Stephen, are you there?
Steve, just bear with me a moment, Maury, while I allow him to talk. Yep. Okay, Steve.
Hello, Steve.
Yeah, did you
here.
You heard my question, right, Steve?
Yes. Slack. We are open for business on Slack. You can join the Slack space that we've created for the CAN by following a link here that I will put into the chat box. Feel free to join any of the channels that are there, join the discussions, join the activities of the various working groups. It's become a very, very active space. Over 200 folks are coming in every day, and discussions are brewing all the time. So I will put the link in the chat box, and if you have any questions, feel free to email me. I'll put my email in there as well. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Stephen. And so this is a dynamic and continually evolving workspace. It's the platform that brought people together for purposes of the current array of presentations that we've been listening to today. And if you are new to Slack, don't be shy. There's a training video that you can access as soon as you gain entry into the platform. And there are a variety of other handholds and other mechanisms available to move you up along the learning curve. So Claudia, I see there's a couple of questions that have popped up in the Q&A box. I'll pass it over to you.
Just before we go into more concrete questions, I'm just going to ask these two that are here. One is, what is the timeline of the planned CE publications? And the second one is, what is the best way to collaborate in the publications? I am interested in the social equity and inclusion book. So maybe you can ask these quickly first.
The plans right now are over the next year, the next few months. We really depends on a lot on how fast our colleagues can work on this and how fast the responses are from some of the books in the journals. For the books, for example, they will need to put a proposal together that probably includes abstracts of the different chapters. So chapters and topics will need to be recruited. The special issues need approval by the journals. What the RCR, the Resources Conservation, has already been approved, and it needs to form an actual call for papers. We imagine that one, the special issue, will probably be out very soon. one of the things that we have been trying to do amongst all these outputs is to have them integrated somehow, to reference each other, to kind of work together. So that may delay a little bit, but hopefully over the summer, we will be able to put together the calls for papers and the necessary proposals to be able to make sure that all these activities are progressing. In terms of deadlines of actual chapters, after the call for papers and the proposals have been put in, it will probably be within a few months after that. We don't expect immediate responses from chapter authors. We'd like to include people outside our circle, so we'd also probably make an open call. And usually that would be a deadline of, at the very earliest, at the end of the year, more likely in the spring or summer of next year. These are just planned. We haven't really detailed them or ironed them out in detail yet, but that's what we are trying to do. Again, if you are interested, we very much encourage you to get in touch with any of us through the Slack channel, through our emails, to be able to participate in any of these activities.
And I would just say, I believe that our registration from the forum is still open. And I'm going to put that down here in the sidebar in the chat. And I believe you can still go and enter your information, and that will put you on the mailing list for all of these activities. So as we pull together the report from the forum and pose all of these asks for the different volumes that we're looking at, you'll have that opportunity. So if you go to that Google Doc and register yourself, then you'll get the next information about participating.
And if you want to view again the open forum that we have there, you can still do that. I think there's
that has been shared.
Yes.
Paul.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have another question here from an anonymous attendee that says, as with much CE research, transitioning to a CE is positioned as a necessary and legitimate approach to addressing environmental problems built upon an ecological modernization perspective. How can CE address the rebound effect, reversing seeing the environment as a problem to be dealt with rather than questioning economic growth and constant consumption?
Well, you want to take it? Go ahead, Paul.
I was going to say that it's although I didn't directly cover it in those in that brief reprise of the themes, the idea of exploring strong sustainability and degrowth and the relationship with the CE came out strongly, actually, in the forum, and so that is a current research interest of many.
I think one of our first speakers, Cindy Eisenhower, actually spoke to that issue directly, saying that, look, there's issues with CE. CE was not built for sustainability and the environment, believe it or not. It was built primarily for technological and economic reasons, or based on many of those reasons. We're not going to throw those aside, but we really need to realize what the implications are for adopting CE.
Yeah. And again, this is where the discussion about adding up to the 9 R's and additionally the 2 additional ones that I was speaking of relationships and regenerative work specifically was brought up frequently, both in terms of agriculture, but in terms of other ways of engaging. And so I think that is precisely why we put all of these things together into this forum, was to take the fundamental concept of a circular economy and make sure that we were including these more sustainable elements as we take the next steps.
Yes, and that's why we had in the title a inclusive, equitable, and environmentally sound circular economy. It's not a given that the circular economy principles are environmentally sound.
Right.
Okay, Claudia, Paul, Joe, Sarah, we're going to move on to the next presentation, and I thank all of you as well as everybody else on your team. It's obvious this is an issue that resonates quite loudly with a number of people who remain with us on today's session. We are going to shift then to the last presentation. And I would, though, like to remind everybody who is still with us that following this presentation, you will be treated to an extraordinary video production that will feature the images and photographs that a number of you have shared with the organizers of the video in recent days. So I do strongly encourage you to stick around for that, and that we will also have an opportunity following the video for more extensive open exchange among all of us. So the last presentation today is focusing in real time on the way in which education for sustainable development is being embedded within pedagogical programs and teaching initiatives in Germany. Full title is School Closures and the COVID-19 Pandemic. Is there a transformational potential for education for sustainable development and or education for sustainable development and sustainable consumption, sorry. This group is Pascal Frank, Daniel Fischer, and Claire Grauer. I see Daniel's image on my screen. I presume, Daniel, are you going to take the lead initially? Or is that going to be Pascal?
Pascal's going to start and we're going to take turns.
Perfect. All right, Pascal, then I pass it over to you.
Great. So thank you, first of all. And to begin with, I would like to thank Maury and the other organizers to give us the opportunity to participate in this virtual conference, which is apparently highly relevant for many people at this moment. So over the last month, we've been inquiring into the transformative potential of the COVID-19 pandemic for education for sustainable development, and particularly education for sustainable consumption. And we are still in the midst of this research, in fact. However, we are looking forward to share and discuss some of our preliminary findings with the audience here. Some of these are very much in line actually with what Neil, Stephen, and Ashley have presented in the beginning. However, I think that there will be also some new points we bring up. So to get started, I will turn over to Daniel, who will provide with some background of our research.
Thank you. Yeah, the research we will present today is actually part of a larger research project with the name ReadCiteCon. It's a German acronym for Time Rebound, Time Wealth, and Sustainable Consumption. And that project is led by our colleague Ulf Schrader, who many of you may know from Technical University Berlin, and also involves environmental modelers from Fraunhofer Institute. So in the project, we look at time rebound effects. That is the extent to the ways we spend time that we have saved, for example, through the use of more efficient technology or just working less. So the extent to which the ways in which we spend that time result in more or less sustainable impacts. And the objectives of this project is to empirically analyze the importance of these time rebound effects for sustainable consumption. The sub-project that we will present today, in that sub-project, we are working with schools to develop an educational intervention. And the goal of this intervention is to raise awareness on the ways we spend our time in the first place and their sustainability impacts, and also to stimulate reflection on alternative ways and strategies to meet our needs that improve both the quality of need satisfaction and the sustainable impacts. And we refer to these skill sets and abilities as time competence. And the goal of our interventions in the schools is to foster the development of this competence. So we've implemented 6 interventions in 3 different schools, and we've worked with students in the age range between 13 and 18 years old. And a key activity that we had implemented as part of our intervention is a change project, curiously, that challenged students to make intentional changes to their time use patterns. And I'll hand it over to Claire.
I think Pascal is going to say something else. Awesome. Or aren't you?
You need to unmute yourself, Pascal.
No, Pascal, yeah.
Okay, Sorry. So as Daniel mentioned, the core activity of the interventions was that the students show sort of a transformational project of their use of time. And next slide, please. Okay. So, and we ran these interventions until March, beginning of March of this year. And then, as you know, we weren't able to continue with these interventions due to the COVID-19 pandemic and school closures. And then what was happening is that we sort of interpreted this school closure and actually the entire COVID-19 pandemic is a collectively shared experiment on transforming one's time use, which was particularly relevant for school students, obviously. So I hand over to Claire.
All right, I'd like to have the next slide, please. Yes, what Pascal just said, we conceived the whole situation as one experiment that we all have to take part in, especially our school kids that we were working with. And so we reformulated or added a new research to our project and said we want to know more about in how far do the disruptions that are caused by the COVID-19 pandemic reveal potentials for stimulating behavioral changes and learning processes towards sustainable consumption among school students. So Pascal said it before, we had already wanted to motivate them to experiment with their time use. Now we all have to do this. And we thought now we can take an even better look at their experiences in this context. What we would like to know more about, or what we want to know more about, is first of all, students' general experiences they are making in this very particular time of crisis, especially their experiences related to schooling, which is homeschooling at the moment, and also in how far this or how this impacts their consumptive actions, because they had to change their behavior in that department a lot as well. What we want to identify is the challenges that students report regarding their time use, especially with regard to their schooling and their patterns and their approaches to consumption, as well as coping strategies, the coping strategies they have developed, and also the skills and abilities that they are making use of or are developing to cope with the present situation and the challenges that they are facing. The next slide, please. We chose a grounded theory approach because this is giving us the possibility of an experimental or sorry, I forgot the correct word. It's giving us the opportunity to explore along the way of our research what we want to know about. We are analyzing documents, that is a wide range, that is scientific reports that are coming out on the present situation, as well as media reports or also social media sources that which there's an abundance of at the present time. And we're doing a lot of interviews and focus groups via Zoom at the moment. We put down there the numbers that we've, these are the people we've been talking about over the past 4 weeks. That's students, teachers, and parents. And we have a number of interviews still lined up for the next weeks, and we'll also include more people like, for example, policymakers and so on as we go along with our data collection. And I'd like to hand back to Pascal now. And the next slide, please.
Okay. So I'm going to share some of the preliminary findings with you, starting with some observations we gained throughout the interviews. Really to begin with, it's important to emphasize that the experiences interviewees reported are highly heterogeneous and also dependent on a variety of factors which we will not be able to cover in their entirety here in this presentation. However, we were able to extrapolate some tendencies that sort of frequently reoccurred during the interviews. And we clustered them according to these three domains, like the general experiences of their daily lives, learning related experience, and also the effects on their consumption. So regarding the general experience, there's an observable desire among students to get back to normal, in fact. And this is due to three reasons, basically due to three reasons. So first of all, students would tendentially experience the situation, the current situation as boring. They are also unsatisfied with the fact that they are not able to pursue their usual hobbies, like for example, playing football, dancing, going out with friends, etc. And this brings me to the third and most important point, namely that they are not able to meet friends as they would usually do. And so this was really a strong and recurring theme within the interviews. However, there were also some benefits the students would tell us about, or like the interviewees would tell us about. And these included, for example, that they could sleep more, they spent more time with the families, they were able to pursue physical activity more regularly. Also, like they were able to try out new things they hadn't done prior to that, like for example, running or cycling, etc. And some of them also said that they would rediscover hobbies they hadn't pursued for a long time, as for example, drawing, playing an instrument, etc. In terms of the learning experiences, the students made similar statements, in fact. So overall, there was an expressed desire to get back to previous schooling. Again, like this was for two reasons. Again, the main reason was that school was associated with meeting friends and social contacts, which was really the most important thing they were missing. However, some of them were also learning related because students experienced the current form of learning more demanding. Because they had to motivate themselves, they had to organize themselves, so this peer feedback, etc., and peer motivation was missing. Also, it was more difficult to understand certain things, and they hadn't sort of the instructions usually provided by teachers. However, there were also a third point that made the situation sort of rather negative was an expressed uncertainty. So students wouldn't actually know what was happening. They wouldn't know how the schooling would proceed, what was actually demanded, etc. And especially this higher students at higher degrees would have this uncertainty regarding their exams, etc. An important advantage of this form of learning was an increased self-determination. That is to say that students were able to really design their days in a much more flexible way. They could, for example, sleep more and then decide what they would do next. They could also determine whether or not they would actually engage in certain learning activities, when they would do it, to what extent they would do it. And this would also allow them, in fact, to pursue certain contents in a much more detailed and profound way, and in a way they wouldn't do it otherwise. What needs to be said about the learning, which is also also relevant for the general experience, however, is that the learning is particularly dependent on a variety of factors, as for example, the general infrastructure of the school, like the digital infrastructure, also the familiarity with the technologies that needed to be applied to pursue the learning, etc. I will come back to some of these later on. In regard to the consumption effects, we could observe that basically shopping ceased. There was basically no shopping, and surprisingly, we found little evidence that sort of shopping activities would be replaced by, for example, online shopping. So most of the people we interviewed would say that there was basically no shopping at all. Interestingly, for example, because they would say, well, I don't meet other people, so it's not relevant. What we also found that, for example, people would stop to eat outside, like students would stop to eat outside, and instead engage in cooking and like preparing their own food, often like in family context again. And sort of an increase could be observed in regard to the use of electronic devices and electronic media. So the use of smartphones would increase. They would watch more series, etc., television, or computer games, etc. And especially the online learning, online schooling was also an important factor here, that they were sort of obliged to use these electronic devices more intensely. Interestingly, when the political restrictions were loosened, like the prevailing conditions still make consumption less attractive for the students. Like, for example, wearing the masks or like long queues would still keep them from engaging in these activities. The next slide, please. Okay, in regard to the potential of the COVID-19 pandemic for sustainable consumption and education for sustainable consumption, we could say that for behavioral changes, like consumption-related behavioral changes, it is interesting that most of the students would actually express an acceptance for the restrictions that were enacted due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And this indicates that potentially, if reasons for certain restrictions decided on a political level are well communicated and comprehensible for students, there seems to be a willingness to pursue them. Also, we found that students were surprisingly able to adapt to these restrictions and, for example, find new ways to spend their time, find new hobbies, etc. On the educational side, it is interesting that the changes sometimes led to an increased personal sustainability, in the sense of they would report less stress and just slept longer, so they had greater occasions to take care of themselves. Also engage in practices they wouldn't have done before, as for example gardening, cooking. I mentioned this before. And a third educational potential is that the pandemic led to value clarification. So due to the restrictions, students would say that they now much more appreciate what they had before, like the possibility to meet friends, the freedom they have to go outside and all this. We, however, also identified certain risks. One is that the restrictions led to some sort of consumption rebound. This means, for example, that some of the students, because of experienced boredom, they would every day cycle to the next McDonald's and eat there, just to spend their time in some way. Then, as mentioned before, the new learning, digital learning format, of course, leads to increased resource use, in the sense of, it is much more like the digital infrastructure is much more used. And a final and quite important risk of the current form of schooling is that it stabilizes certain social inequalities, meaning that those that are already like in a socially disadvantaged situation, they have much more difficulties to engage in this new learning tool. Okay, last slide. So anyways, our next steps for the research, first is to diversify the perspectives, because so far our interviews were strongly based on students from higher secondary education. We want to focus more on other forms of schools and other socioeconomic backgrounds, and also interview education, policy, and administration, because we hope that the latter will allow us to identify specific leverage points within the educational system and make suggestions for precise measures that, based on our findings, can be put forward in order to stabilize some of the beneficial learnings the COVID-19 pandemic has indicated, while avoiding the aforementioned risks and potential adverse serial effects. Yeah, so that's it so far from our side. We very much hope that the conference creates new opportunities for networking and collaborating on education and learning. And if you are willing to do this or simply have any further questions, please get in touch with us. You see our contacts here, and thank you very much for listening.
Okay, Pascal, Daniel, Claire, thank you very much. Let me quickly just pass things over to Claudia.
Yes, I mean, the panelists did a great job and answered the questions in the Q&A section. So they just typed the answers in. But I wonder if they want to comment on the responses they provided. For example, Josh asked, do you have some concrete examples of the intervention practices? Daniel, do you want to say something live about that?
Claire, do you want to take that, as you've designed and implemented the intervention?
Yeah, I just posted a few examples in the chat. So what we did was mainly give the students a few ideas of how to alternatively approach their time. That is, develop a feeling. How long can whatever what we said 8 minutes be? Like, in how far does it differ if I just sit on my chair and do nothing, or use my smartphone, something like that. And then we began the presentation with introducing the project that we wanted them to use. So after about 2/3 or half of the course that we gave them, that we offered, they chose an individual project which they designed. And where they identified an area which they wanted to experiment. That's, for example, some said, I think I spend a lot of time with my smartphone, and I'm going to reduce this time. Or others said, I'd like to, I don't know, have a certain rhythm with my learning. I never get to do my homework, so I just try to come up with a plan, and I have a strict rhythm. So they had projects like these, and we had them observe this for a couple of weeks and document the changes that they realized, and then reflect on this in a final report. So that was what we did.
Yes, I think you kind of answered the question that Josh just posted again. He says that he's also curious to know, how do you ensure students really do exercises? That is, what are the measures that you design to ensure the effectiveness of intervention?
Pascal,
yes, so I'm not entirely sure whether I understood the question, because I mean, what we did here in this, what we just presented, we didn't design this intervention. So I'm not quite sure if you are still interested in the interventions we ran prior to this study.
Maybe it's helpful to just in 2 sentences explain that distinction that Pascal is referring to. So when we had the on-site intervention, students were basically obliged to come, right? So it was a regular class that we were teaching at school, and students had to be there basically on time. It was just like any other class. Whereas with COVID-19 pandemic hitting and the lockdown, this was all shifted to a voluntary base. So that really changed the situation tremendously, but allowed us at the same time to explore like the effects of the context and the setting. So if we have if we're forcing students to participate versus encouraging them to participate voluntarily, what differences that makes with regard to their investment in this intervention. So that is something that we are monitoring and exploring in our research.
Thank you. We have to wrap up, so I'll pass it on to Maury.
Okay, Claudia. And again, thanks to Daniel, Pascal, and Claire. We're going to now transition into a different and new activity. This is the last session of this mini conference. I applaud all of you who have stuck it out here to this final part. This whole process has been a bit of an experiment as well in trying to determine exactly where sort of people's levels of endurance are for this kind of format. So we've learned something a little bit along those lines as well. So what we're going to do next is I'm going to, or I think Joe is going to flip control of the screen over to Esty. And Esty, Emanuela, and Ashley have been working hard over the last several days to produce the current feature that we're going to see. So I don't know if there are any other introductory words that need to be said. I'll pass it over to the team that produced the film.
Just to confirm, everybody can see the screen?
Yes.
On behalf of the New Narratives Working Group, I invite you to stay zoomed in for just a few more minutes to view images illustrating personal experiences and inspirations for sustainability transitions many of you kindly shared. As a scientist working at the intersection of ecological conservation and community engagement, I have found that personal narratives expressed through various art forms can help bring awareness and evidence for scientific research and be a powerful tool for change. When communities are brought together to celebrate their cultural and natural heritage, and as threats to their well-being and resiliency are exposed, opportunities are created to engage dialogues between citizens and decision makers and to bring visibility to emerging initiatives. Through this pandemic, we all have been forced to evaluate a sense of well-being individually and as a global community. Via virtual network, we have an unprecedented opportunity to connect, collaborate, and harness the power of a new global collective intelligence to create systemic change. I hope that new heartfelt connections and collaboration will emerge from this conference and that you will continue to share your vision and initiatives through this gallery, which will move to a larger virtual platform. Thank you very much.
Okay, I think it's back over to me. Esty, did you or anybody else on your team have anything further that they wanted to add? I thought that was a wonderful gift that you've given us. Thank you.
Thank you, Murray. Just that the album is still open and Ashley shared it in the chat and that we welcome more submission to keep it going.
And where does anybody who may want to find the video as it currently exists, does it live somewhere?
I'm going to post it to the various social medias, and our Slack, of course, as a beginning, so everybody can have access.
Oh, perfect. Okay.
And
so,
I would just add that this is an open-ended project. Anyone who wants to get involved in developing this project of visual narratives and sustainability transitions is welcome to get in touch with us in the Slack space. We've been working together and upload more pictures and videos. Thank you.
And I wanted to also add thank you to Nidiana, who really helped us put the video together. And I welcome any questions regarding art and science partnerships. Feel free.
Great, thanks. I mean, this was, again, another example of spontaneous and organic collaboration. As far as I know, that the folks who were involved in producing this video did not know each other until just a few short weeks ago. This is a wonderful visible manifestation of a terrific collaboration. And I think also a nice way of conveying that, you know, this is not a purely academic group and that we are a team of multi-talents. So we welcome and heartfully embrace others who would like to join with us as we take this experiment forward. Then moving to the final phase of this mini conference, we had planned here to throw open the virtual doors and allow anyone who had any short final comments that they wanted to make on the live feed, as opposed to just posting comments in the chat. So let us do that now. I think probably the easiest way to do so is if you go to the participants list and raise your virtual hand. I should be able to see you and call upon you, and Paul will hopefully be able to then activate your microphone.
Yeah, will do.
So this is not the moment for shyness or hesitation.
Okay, John. Okay, Maury, over to John. John Case.
Okay.
Thank you very much for all the presentations. I appreciated them. The one thing that I saw across many of them is the potential for really being specific with what comes next, and the specificity, I think, will depend on common set of metrics, key performance indicators, something that would allow us to build something of a dashboard to track progress in these noble goals. I just would like to know more as the group stays together, what developments come from that. I think that there's so much promise in all of these projects and initiatives, but I would like to know more about how we can maybe provide other people with clear metrics of how things are progressing. Thank you all.
Great, thanks, John. Anyone else like to make any observations or interject a comment? Sylvia.
Sylvia.
Floor is yours, Sylvia.
Hi. So I've heard very interesting new things, but I've heard a lot of things which are discussed, at least in Germany, radio channels. So it seemed to be a general mood to think about how to keep as much as of the positive things. And I'm wondering how the insights we were sharing here are transferred in a broader way to journalists, to media, to a broader public.
I'm going to throw that one over to somebody else on the organizing team. Can always count on you, Sylvia, to be provocative and challenging. So thank you for that.
Maybe it's more food for thought than something to answer now.
Well, couched in those terms, I will chew on it while I have my lunch when we finish this this conference. Then thank you, Sylvia. Anyone else who is still with us like to add some finalizing observations or comments?
I have 2 polls that were sent out, and maybe I should provide the results. One of them is ongoing right now, and I will please answer that one, and I will tell you what areas of professions the participants were as of right now. And I will also show you the earlier poll, which shows where people signed in. And this wasn't when it was at the peak, but this kind of gives you an example or a small sample of where the individuals were from and what they do. So I am going now to end the polling for the current work area in progress. I will share results in the profession, and as you will see, most of us are from academia, not surprising, and there was a few others. NGOs and governments played the relatively small. Industry, which is surprising, was not as well involved at the end of the session. If we had done this, we would have done it maybe a little bit earlier and been able to see who was there when we first got on. Now let me see, the other poll was current work area. Let me see the first one. This is the results. And I'm going to share you the results of where we came from. And this was done earlier during the break time. And as you see, most of us, 50 people of maybe, a percentage, I think it was like 120 who responded, 32%, so 150 responded. 1/3 were from North America. South America was represented. Sub-Saharan Africa, very lightly represented. Only 1 person from North Africa. Europe, which was broken up into Western and Southern Europe, had a strong representation, about the other 1/3 of representatives. And Asia, Eastern Asia, represented a large other percentage, which again shows who was participating and maybe part of the criticism of who was involved in this discussion, and the issue of inclusiveness may arise here as well. So those are my comments about the polls.
I mean, one observation, Joe, as a means of not over-interpreting these results. Part of it has to do with time of day, I think. This event is taking place during the afternoon hours in Europe. Maybe it indicates that people are a little bit more freely available that time of the day. Unfortunately,
and if we were going to say North America, I would say very few people on the West Coast have shown up either.
Yeah, I'm not sure Neil is still with us, but that's been a challenge, and also perhaps one of the reasons why, unfortunately, our Australian and New Zealand friends are not as widely represented. But let me thank you, Joe, for those polls. I see there's a hand being raised by James Schulman. If we could activate his microphone, and he himself could, I think he's ready to go. So James, go right ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Just a comment that I was surprised, maybe I missed it, but I didn't hear it. But for me is a very optimistic thing that as far as I know, there was only one country in the world, I think Belarus, that chose not to go into shutdown mode to protect folks from this virus. And that was in my mind, is a very, it's a specific choice for life. It's a choice to protect human lives. And I can't imagine that this would have been the choice of 99% of all the countries in the world, 100 years ago. So I think we're making progress on our decision-making, just to choose to protect ourselves. That's all.
Yeah, I think that's a shrewd insight, though I can't claim any familiarity with the sort of body politic of Belarus, but based on my understanding of governance arrangements there, that was a decision principally of one person, and opportunities for others who may have disagreed with it are extremely limited. But the comparison to what occurred 100 years ago, almost to the day, is a powerful and important insight. Thank you, James. Anyone else as we begin to wind down this mini conference? While we're waiting to see if anybody else would like to jump in, Joe, could you pull up those last final slides that we had in the deck? Joe? Okay. All right. Yeah, let's start with that one. There has been a real orchestra of people involved in the arrangements and delivery of this webinar, and I just want to spend the last few minutes here giving full recognition and acknowledgement to all of them. This has been a challenging and mostly fun activity to put together. We've had an organizing committee that has been specifically responsible for the arrangements of the conference. That's been comprised of Magnus, Caroline, myself, Ashley, Paul, Felix, Ria, Hein, Stephen, Claudia, Joe, Nediana, Craig, Emanuela, and Esti. We don't have all regions of the world represented here, but we have most of them. And we take heart in having successfully pulled together a global constellation of colleagues to make this event possible. Next slide, please, Joe. This initiative, or this webinar today, has been embedded and is part of the larger COVID-19 and Sustainability Transitions Initiative. And the folks who have been guiding that process include Magnus, myself, Paul, Ria, Hein, Stephen, Joe, Patrick, and Esty. And finally, this would have never, next slide please, Joe, this would have never come together if it were not for the prior existence of the Future Earth Knowledge Action Network on Systems of Sustainable Consumption and Production. I'd like to give a big shout out to Amy Luers, the Executive Director of Future Earth, and everyone who is part of her team, and that to thank them also for enabling the existence of our Knowledge Action Network and encouraging us over the last several years as we've been plowing this particular furrow. The management team of the Future Earth Knowledge Action Network on Systems of Sustainable Consumption and Production is administered by a management team comprising Magnus, myself, Charlotte Jensen, Ria Lambino, Sylvia Lorek, Hein Malay, Stephen McGreevy, and Patrick Schroeder, and my heartfelt thanks to all of them. For anybody who would like to stay in contact with the activities of the Knowledge Action Network, our web address is there, and we encourage you to contact us either through that channel or by email or carrier pigeon, or you can even throw a note tied to a rock through one of our windows. Let me pause for a second to turn to the technical team that has comprised Paul, Claudia, and Joe, and ask them if they have any final remarks that they'd like to make.
Just to thank Cal Bracken, there you have him right there, for doing all those interesting items. Cal, will these be available to our viewers or our participants at some time in the future?
Yeah, I can make them available and share them with you.
And
I have nothing
Paul,
else to add, Maury. Thank you.
Can I just ask Carl, there was someone asking what app do you use? I don't know if this is something you want to reveal, but if you do.
Sure, I use, this is, the program that I'm working in is just your Adobe Photoshop. And then I draw currently on a Wacom tablet. And yeah, the way that I am showing the screen is actually through a document camera that is recording my actual computer screen. I guess that's probably a cool way to show it. Yeah, so this is my just basic computer, and then this is my Wacom tablet that I'm using, and then yeah, that's pretty much my setup. Yeah.
Well, that was very brave of you, Cal. We got to see your desktop. I'm not sure I'd be prepared to aim my camera at my desktop as it looks at the moment. So,
Yeah.
so thank you, Cal. Neil, I don't know whether you're still with us, but thank you very much for the inspiring comments that kicked off this mini conference. And with that, I think we'll bring things to a close. I thank all of you for your perseverance, those of you who have stuck it out here to the bitter end. And we will all be in touch in due course, and everybody be well and